I returned to my family's old bookstore closed for 6 years just to retrieve something I'd left behind. But in the basement, I discovered my son hiding a man whose face had appeared on a wanted broadcast 3 weeks earlier. He slowly pulled a compact black stun device from his jacket. A sharp electric crack snapped through the basement air and said coldly, "Go upstairs, Dad. I only need 72 hours." I froze. Meanwhile, the fugitive glanced at one of my old novels sitting in the dark corner and smiled. "You're the one who wrote the blueprint that turned me into the perfect criminal." Quick pause before we begin. Drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and doing what's right? Yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling. The heart of it, the message, is what I hope stays with you. I upgraded the security on my closed bookstore 6 years ago. Motion sensors reinforced locks. The works, but tonight, as rain hammered my windshield, I spotted an unplated black SUV parked where absolutely no one should be. My name is Howard Ross. I'm 64 years old, and for 30 years I wrote mystery novels that topped bestseller lists. But I never imagined I'd become a character in my own worst nightmare. The storm had hit Beaverton, Oregon hard around 10:30. November rain that felt biblical, turning streets into rivers. I'd been sitting in my living room trying to wrap Curtis Griffin's birthday present when I remembered the antique Japanese woodblock print I'd stashed in the Heritage's back office months ago. Perfect gift for a man who'd been my best friend since college. Sheriff Curtis Griffin turned 65 tomorrow, and I'd promised him something meaningful. I told myself it would take 10 minutes. In, out, home by midnight. The drive through the storm felt apocalyptic. My Volvo's wipers could barely keep pace with the downpour. Lightning cracked the sky every few seconds, illuminating empty parking lots and shuttered storefronts. The Heritage sat on the edge of a commercial district that had seen better days. Antique shops, a used record store, a cafe that changed ownership every 18 months. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in this weather, the whole block looked abandoned. Then my headlights caught it. The SUV had no plates. That's the detail that stopped me cold. It was parked in the narrow service alley behind the Heritage, tucked against the brick wall where the dumpsters used to sit. Only 2 people on Earth knew about that spot, me and my son Prescott. We'd used it for years when the front lot flooded during heavy rains. But Prescott lived in Portland now, 40 minutes away, and had no reason to be here. I'm a crime novelist. I know what no plates means. I pulled into the front lot and killed the engine. Rain drummed against the roof like fists. Through the downpour, the Heritage looked exactly as it had the day I locked it 6 years ago. 2 stories of red brick, narrow windows, the faded gold lettering above the door, reading the Heritage Rare and Vintage Books, established 1972. My father's dream, his escape from a life that had nearly destroyed him. Now just another closed storefront in a dying neighborhood. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped into the storm. The rain soaked through my jacket in seconds. Cold water ran down my neck as I fumbled with my keys at the front door. My hands shook, not from cold. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Darkness swallowed me whole. The bookstore had been closed for 6 years. Locked, monitored, empty. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through absolute blackness, illuminating towers of shelves that stretched toward a ceiling I couldn't see. Dust motes swirled in the light. The smell hit me immediately, old paper leather bindings, the faint ghost of my father's cherry pipe tobacco. Scents that shouldn't exist in a building this sealed, this long abandoned. Every shelf, every corner, I knew this place better than my own home. I'd grown up here, spent afternoons after school reshelving used paperbacks while Dad worked the register. I'd written my first novel in the back office, hunched over a manual typewriter, surrounded by first editions and board boxes. After Dad's death, I closed the doors. In 2017, I couldn't bring myself to sell it or reopen it. The Heritage became a tomb, a monument. A locked door I visited twice a year to pay property taxes and check the security system. But tonight, it didn't feel empty. I moved deeper into the main floor flashlight, sweeping left and right. Fiction section, history, biography, everything exactly where it should be. The beam caught the edge of Dad's old oak desk near the register, still covered with the same papers from the day he died. An invoice from my estate sale, a coffee mug with dried residue at the bottom, a framed photo of him and my mother on their wedding day, 1957. My father built this place with his bare hands in 1972. He filled it with stories that could save you or destroy you. Tonight, I was about to find out which. I reached the back hallway. The office door stood to my right. The woodblock print would be in the filing cabinet third drawer, wrapped in acid-free paper. I'd grab it and leave. Forget about the SUV. Call Curtis from home, maybe. Let him decide if it warranted investigation. Then I heard it, a sound from below, from the basement. Low, guttural, suppressed. A groan. I froze. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. The basement stairwell was 10 feet ahead, a black rectangle in the wall, leading down into deeper darkness. We'd used the basement for storage overflow inventory, damaged books, boxes of my father's personal effects I couldn't sort through. I'd been down there once in the last 6 years, maybe 18 months ago, to check for water damage after a pipe burst. Nothing lived down there. Nothing could. The groan came again. Longer this time. Pain and effort compressed into a sound designed not to carry. Someone trying desperately not to be heard. That groan. I'd written that exact sound 100 times in my novels. Someone injured, hiding, desperate. And they were in my basement. I should have run. Should have backed out the front door, gotten in my Volvo called Curtis. Let professionals handle whatever this was. But 30 years of writing crime fiction had trained me to ask questions. To need answers. To walk toward danger with a flashlight and a foolish certainty that I could handle whatever I found. The groan sounded again, closer now, clearer. I took a step toward the basement stairs, then another. The bookstore had been closed for 6 years. No one lived here. No one could possibly be here. But that sound, I had written it too many times not to recognize it. The sound of someone in severe pain trying desperately not to be heard. My hand found the basement door handle, cold metal against my palm. I pulled it open. Darkness rose up from below like smoke. The stairs creaked under my weight. I didn't care anymore about being quiet. Each wooden step groaned like a warning I should have heeded. The flashlight beam bounced ahead of me, illuminating concrete walls, streaked with water damage and cobwebs thick as curtains. The smell hit harder the deeper I went, antiseptic, sharp and chemical, and beneath it, copper, blood. The basement door stood partially open at the bottom of the stairs. Light leaked through the gap. Not flashlight, electric light. Someone had power down here. I pushed the door wide. The scene froze me like a photograph I'd spend the rest of my life trying to burn. Prescott Ross. My son, my paralegal son, with his pressed suits and perfect resume, knelt beside a makeshift cot in the center of the basement. His hands moved with focused precision, wrapping white gauze around the bleeding shoulder of a heavily tattooed man who lay shirtless on blood-stained sheets. An LED camping lantern sat on an overturned crate, casting harsh shadows across both their faces. My son, my only son, in my basement, with blood on his hands. Prescott, I said. His head snapped up. For 1 second, just one, I saw pure terror flash across his face. The same expression he'd worn at age 7 when I caught him stealing quarters from my desk drawer. Then it vanished, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Something cold. Dad, this wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the man on the cot was very real. 45 years old, heavily muscled, covered in prison ink from neck to wrists. A fresh wound to his left shoulder, blood seeping through the gauze Prescott had just applied. His breathing came shallow and ragged, and I knew his face. I interviewed you, I heard myself say. Oregon State, cell block D, November 2013. The man's eyes focused on me. Recognition flickered, then something darker, amusement. Howard Ross, he said. His voice was gravel and smoke. The novelist? Hugh Bennett. The name crashed into my consciousness like a freight train. I'd spent 6 hours with him in that prison interview room 10 years ago, researching wrongful convictions for a book that never got published. He'd been serving 12 years for dangerous robbery. He'd told me his story with such conviction, framed by corrupt cops, betrayed by his public defender, innocent of everything except being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You told me you were innocent. I believed you. He'd been exonerated in 2021. DNA evidence proved he hadn't been at the crime scene. The state apologized, gave him a settlement. The news had called it a triumph of justice. 3 weeks ago, I'd seen his face on a different kind of news. FBI bulletin, gold heist in Seattle, 3 security guards dead, Hugh Bennett wanted for murder. And I wrote you into my book, The Ghost Protocol. Hugh said, reading my thoughts. His eyes tracked lazily across the basement landing on a dust-covered shelf near the water heater. My breath stopped. There, spine out, among boxes of my father's old ledgers, sat a copy of The Ghost Protocol, my fourth novel, published 2015. The one where I'd reimagined Hugh's case as fiction, a wrongly convicted man who gets released and uses everything he learned in prison to become the perfect criminal. Have you ever seen your child do something so unthinkable that your mind refuses to process it? That's where I stood, in the doorway between the father I'd been 60 seconds ago and the stranger I was about to become. Prescott, I said again. My voice sounded hollow. What is this? He stood slowly, carefully. His hands were covered in Hugh's blood, dark and wet under the lantern light. He wiped them on a towel that had once been white. You weren't supposed to be here, he said. This is my building. The words died in my throat. They sounded absurd. Legal ownership meant nothing compared to the reality in front of me. This man is wanted by the FBI for murder. I know what he is. Then why? Go upstairs, Dad. It wasn't a request. Prescott's right hand moved behind his back. When it came forward, it held a compact black stun device. His thumb rested over the trigger, calm and steady. A sharp electric crack snapped through the basement air. Prescott, put that thing away. Whatever this is, go upstairs now. The device didn't waver. His hand didn't shake. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his mother died, the young man who'd graduated top of his class at Lewis and Clark Law School, was threatening his father with eyes that held no recognition, no love, no hesitation. Behind him, Hugh Bennett shifted on the cot. A smile spread across his face, slow, knowing. Your dad's a hell of a writer, Hugh said. Taught me everything I needed to know. My son stood between me and the stairs, holding that device like he had already decided who I was to him. Move, Prescott said. I stepped backward. My legs felt disconnected from my body. The flashlight slipped from my fingers and clattered on the concrete floor. Prescott advanced. The device stayed level. I climbed the stairs. At the top, he gestured toward the reading room. Inside, Prescott said. I only knew one thing. My son had trapped me in my own bookstore, and a wanted man was smiling at my book like he'd found an old friend. The chain rattled as Prescott threaded it through the reading room door handles, heavy industrial links, the kind you'd use to secure a shipping container, not your own father. I stood in the darkness, hands pressed against the wood, feeling each metallic clink like a nail being driven into my chest. This room had been my sanctuary once, a mezzanine space overlooking the main floor, built by my father in 1978 with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and one tall window facing the street. I'd written 3 novels here before the grief of his death made the building unbearable. Now it was my prison. The padlock clicked shut. Final. Absolute. You just need to stay quiet for 72 hours, Prescott said through the gap. His voice was steady, clinical. That's all. Prescott, my throat felt raw. Talk to me, whatever this is. 72 hours. Hugh will be across the border. You can call whoever you want after that. Are you doing this for money, Prescott? Silence. Long enough that I thought he'd walked away. Then his voice came back quieter but sharp as broken glass. I'm doing this because you and grandfather lied to me for 28 years. The words landed like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, hip, catching the edge of Dad's old reading desk. 28 years. My son's entire life. What lie? I said. Prescott, what are you talking about? Footsteps, moving away, down the stairs, gone. I pressed my forehead against the door. The wood smelled like old varnish and dust. My breath came in shallow bursts. What lie? My mind spun backward, searching for purchase. 28 years ago, 1995. Prescott was born in March. My wife Margaret was still alive. We were happy. Dad was running the bookstore, teaching Prescott to stack paperbacks before the kid could even read. What could we have possibly lied about? Then another memory surfaced unbidden. August, 3 months ago. A bright Sunday morning. I'd been in my kitchen making coffee when Prescott arrived unannounced. He'd brought pastries from that bakery on Canyon Road, my favorite, the ones with real butter and too much sugar. He'd smiled, hugged me, played the dutiful son perfectly. How are you feeling, Dad? Good. Better. The physical therapist says my shoulder's healing well. Still writing. Trial. The new manuscript's fighting me. We'd sat at the kitchen table like we always did. Coffee, small talk. He'd asked about my health my week, whether I'd heard from any old friends. Normal conversation, comfortable. Then casually, "Are you planning to upgrade the security at the Heritage, the cameras, I mean?" I'd laughed. "The shop's been closed for 6 years, son. What's there to steal?" "Just concerned about your dad, that's all. There's been a lot of break-ins around that neighborhood lately. The alarm system still works. That's enough." He nodded, changed the subject, asked about Curtis, about my publisher, about whether I wanted to see the new Spielberg film. I'd thought nothing of it. How many times can you miss the truth when it's standing right in front of you, calling you dad, bringing you coffee, asking questions you think come from love but actually come from something much colder? Because that wasn't the only time. I sat down hard on the floor back against the door. The reading room had no light except what filtered in from the street through the window, orange sodium glow, dim and sickly. July. Prescott had asked about the bookstore's housekeeper schedule. "Does Mrs. Chen still come on Tuesdays?" June. He'd mentioned dropping by the Heritage to check on things while I was visiting Curtis in Portland. "Just want to make sure that everything's secure, Dad." May. He'd requested my old keyring. "To get a copy made for emergencies." 3 times. He'd asked about security cameras 3 times over 6 months. Each question framed slightly differently. Concerned son, protective, dutiful. I'd handed him a blueprint of every security gap without even realizing it. The nausea hit me in waves. I pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every Sunday morning visit. Every phone call asking how I was feeling, whether I needed anything. Every carefully calibrated question designed to extract information. I'd trusted him because that's what fathers do. You don't interrogate your child when they bring you pastries and ask if you're okay. You don't analyze their motives when they offer to help. You see them through the lens of memory. The boy who fell asleep reading under your desk, who wanted to be just like you, who cried at your wife's funeral and promised he'd always take care of you. You miss every single red flag because you're looking at a ghost, not the man standing in front of you. I'd written 23 novels about fathers who failed to see their son's darkness. I'd just never imagined I'd become one of my own cautionary tales. The window rattled in a gust of wind. Rain still hammered the glass, turning the street below into a blur of reflected light. I could see the outline of my Volvo in the parking lot. Beyond it, empty road, no other cars, no witnesses. Prescott had chosen tonight perfectly. Storm, late hour, closed building, no cameras, no housekeeper, no one to interrupt. How long had he been watching, waiting? What other questions had I missed? I stood and moved to the window, pressing my palm against the cold glass. Across the street, a cafe sat dark and shuttered. Next to it, the record store with its hand-painted sign. Normal neighborhood, normal night. Except my son was holding an FBI fugitive in the basement of my father's bookstore, and I had no idea why. "You and grandfather lied to me for 28 years. I turned the words over in my mind like stones, searching for edges I could grip. What could my father and I have possibly concealed from Prescott his entire life? We'd raised him together after Margaret died. We'd been honest, open. We'd built a family on trust, hadn't we? The reading room suddenly felt smaller, airless. The bookshelves pressed in from all sides. Dad's first editions, his collection of maritime histories, his signed Hemingways and Steinbecks. Artifacts of a man I thought I'd known completely. But standing in his locked room trapped by my own son, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I had absolutely no idea what my son was talking about, and that was far more terrifying than the device in his hand. I had no answers. Just questions multiplying in the darkness, each one more terrifying than the last. Then footsteps on the stairs. Prescott was coming back, and this time when he spoke through the locked door, his voice carried the cold precision of a lawyer, presenting evidence that would destroy me. "I need you to understand something, Dad." His words were measured, calm, professional. This wasn't blackmail. I wasn't coerced. 8 months ago, I approached Hugh Bennett with a business proposition. I pressed my ear against the gap in the door. My hands trembled against the wood. $800,000. That's what I accepted, Dad. The number landed like a physical blow. I staggered backward, hip catching the corner of the reading desk. $800,000. Prescott continued, his tone never wavering. Cash. Half up front, half on delivery. I provided detailed security blueprints for the Aurora Gold Depository in Seattle, guard rotations, camera blind spots, vault access protocols, emergency response timelines, everything he needed. I couldn't breathe. The reading room walls pressed in from all sides. I wasn't forced. I approached him. This was my choice. Why, the word ripped out of me. Prescott, why? Silence. Then his voice came back harder. Because I feel like I've lived 40 years of debt, and I've spent my entire life living in the shadow of a dead grandfather's decaying legacy and a father's fading fame. I work 70-hour weeks as a paralegal, making $60,000 a year, while you sit in your paid-off house writing novels nobody reads anymore. I needed my own future. Not grandfather's bookstore, not your old awards. 41. He'd said 41. But Prescott was 28. I knew my son's age. I'd been there the day he was born. Unless the thought died before it could form. My brain refused to process it. The heritage was perfect. Prescott continued, oblivious to my silence. No active security cameras. 0-foot traffic. The building's been closed for 6 years. Anyone asks, it's just empty commercial real estate. And I already knew Imogene's cleaning schedule down to the minute. Second Tuesday of every month, 9 a.m. to noon. Never varies. Imogene, our housekeeper, 47 years old Guatemalan immigrant, worked for our family for 15 years. He'd weaponized her schedule. $800,000. My son, my only son, standing on the other side of a locked door, explaining it like billing hours. Hugh needed a safe house for 72 hours, Prescott said. I provided one. Tomorrow night he crosses into Canada with forged documentation. I get the second half of the payment, then we're done. You never see me again, and I never see you. You killed 3 people, I said. My voice sounded hollow, distant. Hugh killed 3 security guards in Seattle. I didn't kill anyone. Hugh's operational decisions aren't my responsibility. Operational decisions. He was talking about murder like it was a line item in a contract. Footsteps. Moving away again, down the stairs. Back to the basement where a wanted killer lay bleeding on a cot. I slid down the door until I hit the floor. Cold wood pressed against my spine. The reading room smelled like old paper and my father's ghost. $800,000. My son had sold his conscience for $800,000. And he was explaining it to me like a quarterly earnings report. I don't know how long I sat there. Time lost meaning. The storm outside had weakened to steady rain. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned. The heating system my father installed in 1985 clicked and rattled. 41 years old, Prescott had said, but he was 28. I was 64. My son was 28. The math was absolute, unchangeable. Unless I was losing my mind. Unless everything I thought I knew was wrong. My gaze drifted to the bookshelves surrounding me. Dad's collection, his life's work, first editions, signed copies, Hemingway, Steinbeck, Chandler, and tucked on the third shelf from the bottom spine, barely visible in the dim orange glow from the street, my own novels. 7 of them, hardcover first editions, including The Ghost Protocol. Hugh's smile. The memory crashed over me like ice water. His eyes tracking across the basement landing on that book, the knowing curve of his lips. I forced myself to reconstruct it. November 2013. Oregon State Penitentiary. Cell Block D. I'd been researching wrongful convictions for what would become my most successful novel. The warden had arranged interviews with 3 inmates, all serving long sentences, all maintaining their innocence. Hugh Bennett had been the 3rd. He'd sat across from me in that gray interview room for 6 hours. Articulate, intelligent, compelling. He'd explained how corrupt police had framed him for a dangerous robbery he didn't commit. How his public defender had slept through half the trial. How DNA evidence that could have exonerated him had been lost in processing. I'd believed him. Completely. I'd written about him. I understood him. I made him sympathetic. The novel's antagonist, Marcus Thorne, had been a direct psychological portrait of Hugh Bennett, a wrongfully convicted man who gets released and decides the system failed him so catastrophically that he owes it nothing, who uses everything he learned in 12 years of prison to become the criminal he'd been falsely accused of being. The book had been a massive success. 2.1 million copies sold, a literary award, film rights optioned. Hugh was exonerated 8 years later. DNA proved his innocence. The state apologized, paid him a settlement. And 3 weeks ago, he'd killed 3 people in a gold heist. What responsibility does a writer bear when the characters they create walk off the page and into the real world carrying the blueprint you gave them? I'd spent 6 hours with Hugh Bennett, cataloging his intelligence, his rage, his tactical mind. I'd turned him into fiction, made him a bestseller, put the book on every shelf in America, including the basement of this building. Did I hand him the psychological blueprint of a perfect criminal? Did he read the ghost protocol in his cell and see it not as a cautionary tale, but as an instruction manual? The questions spiraled. No answers, just guilt layering on guilt. I wrote about him. I understood him. I handed him the exact map to become the man I fictionalized. 10 years of writing, 2.1 million copies sold, a literary award, and all of it in some twisted way led straight to this cellar, this stormy night, and a killer looking back at me with eyes full of gratitude. The guilt sat in my chest like a stone, but guilt wouldn't get me out of this locked room. I pushed myself up from the floor and moved to the window. The rain had finally stopped. The street below lay empty and dark, except for pools of orange light under the street lamps. At 12:30 a.m., my neighbor Ethel Butler's window. Light blinked on, stayed lit for exactly 3 seconds. Went dark, then repeated. And in that moment, I realized I might not be as alone as Prescott thought. I pressed my face against the cold glass, breath fogging the pain. Ethel lived in the renovated Victorian directly across from the Heritage. 68 years old, retired elementary school teacher, widowed for a decade. She'd brought me casserole when Margaret died. She waved from her porch every time I drove past. Sweet, harmless, the kind of neighbor who remembered your birthday and complained about city noise ordinances. But why was she awake at midnight? The light blinked again. On, 3 seconds, off, on again. That light, on, off, on, too deliberate to be random. I watched for 2 full minutes. The pattern never varied. 3 seconds on, 5 seconds off, repeat. Someone out there knows I'm in trouble. My hands shook against the window frame. Hope felt dangerous. Hope meant expectations that could shatter. But I couldn't stop myself from believing that light meant something. Then the memory surfaced. Yesterday morning, no, technically 2 mornings ago now, November 14th, I'd been making coffee when the doorbell rang. Ethel had stood on my front porch holding her signature apple pie, the one she baked every Tuesday without fail. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair cut short and bright green eyes that always seemed to be smiling. I know you don't need another pie, Howard, but I made 2 and can't possibly eat them both. You're a saint, Ethel. Hardly. Just a bored old woman with too much time and too much butter. We'd chatted for maybe 5 minutes. Her arthritis, my shoulder, the weather turning cold. As she'd turned to leave, a slip of paper fell from her cardigan pocket and landed on my doormat. She'd snatched it up with surprising speed for someone who claimed arthritis made her hands stiff. Held it up apologetically. My doctor's number. I'm getting so terribly forgetful. I'd glanced at it. Handwritten. A phone number with Dr. Morrison scribbled at the top in neat block letters. You should put it in your phone, I'd said. Oh, I'm hopeless with those things. Paperwork's just fine for me. She'd smiled, walked back to her house. I thought nothing of it. But standing at this locked window now, the memory sharpened into focus. The number had no area code prefix. It was formatted strangely groups of digits that didn't follow the standard pattern, almost like a tactical field line. And her hands hadn't trembled at all when she picked it up, but her hands were steady, too steady. What kind of doctor uses a number formatted like that? Have you ever been so desperate for a sign that anyone knows you're in danger, that you'd read meaning into a blinking light at midnight? I pressed my face against that cold glass and prayed I wasn't imagining it. The light blinked on, 3 seconds off. Ethel knew. Somehow she knew. But how and what was she? Another memory crashed forward, this one sharper, more urgent. Last week, Friday, November 10th, I'd been working in my home office when Imogene Burns stopped by to drop off mail she'd accidentally collected from my porch the day before. Imogene was our housekeeper, had been for 15 years. 47 years old, Guatemalan immigrant, warm smile that rarely reached her eyes anymore. She worked 2 jobs to support her teenage son. Cleaned houses during the day, worked nights at a hotel near the airport. She'd handed me the small stack of envelopes. I'd thanked her, started to turn away. Then she'd said, almost offhand, I was going to come by earlier yesterday, but I saw Prescott's car parked out back, around 2 in the morning, so I didn't want to disturb him. I'd nodded absently. He probably needed to grab some old files from the bookstore. Of course. Tell him I said hello. November 3rd. She'd seen Prescott's car at the Heritage at 2 a.m. on November 3rd. 11 days ago. Prescott had just confessed he'd brought Hugh into the building about 2 weeks ago. The math aligned perfectly. Imogene saw them. She'd been driving home from her night shift at the hotel. The route took her straight past the Heritage. At 2 a.m., the street would have been empty. She would have noticed Prescott's distinctive BMW parked in the service alley. She'd seen him. Maybe seen Hugh, too, limping toward the building with Prescott's support. And she'd said nothing. Not to me, not to anyone. Why? The answer hit me like ice water. Imogene has a son. She's a single mother working 2 jobs to keep him in this country legally. And Prescott knew exactly which pressure point to squeeze. I could see it clearly now, Prescott approaching her. The calculated smile. The lawyer's voice explaining very carefully what would happen if she told anyone what she'd seen. Immigration, investigations, her son's status reviewed, deportation proceedings. He'd terrorized a woman who'd cleaned our house for 15 years, who'd made my wife soup when she was dying, who trusted us. And I'd noticed nothing, because I'd been looking at my son through the lens of memory instead of seeing the monster he'd become. I thought back to the past week. Imogene had come by twice to drop off mail, pick up laundry. Both times she'd seemed nervous, distracted. Her hands had shaken when she handed me the clothing basket. I'd attributed it to stress, asked if she was okay. She'd smiled and said she was fine. She was terrified, and I'd been too blind to see it. Imogene saw them, and my son made sure she'd never tell. Across the street, Ethel's light blinked its steady pattern, on off on. I stood at that window, forehead pressed against glass, and realized something that made my blood run colder than it already was. I wasn't the only person in danger anymore. Imogene knew. Ethel suspected something. Prescott had already proven he would threaten a terrified immigrant mother to protect his plan. What would he do if he realized other people were watching? The light blinked. Morning would bring answers, but not the ones I wanted to hear. I couldn't warn them. All I could do was stand at that window until exhaustion pulled me to the floor, where I slept in fits against the cold wall. Morning came cold and gray, and when Prescott brought me coffee through the gap in the locked door, the same blend we'd shared every Sunday for 10 years, I realized some rituals don't survive betrayal. The chain rattled. A paper cup appeared in the narrow space, followed by a wrapped sandwich. "You need to eat, Dad. Stay hydrated." His voice was calm, clinical, like he was advising a client. I took the coffee. The warmth spread through my fingers. I raised it to my lips and tasted it. Rich, dark, exactly how I liked it. The same blend we'd bought together from that roaster on Burnside Street every month for a decade. We used to sit in my kitchen every Sunday morning with this exact coffee blend. He'd tell me about his cases, and I'd tell him about my manuscripts. The ritual felt permanent, sacred. Shows you how wrong a father can be. "Do you even know his real name?" I said through the gap. "Do you know he killed 3 people?" Silence. Then Prescott's voice came back flat and empty. "I know, and I'm doing this anyway." The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. 3 security guards. They had families, children. I didn't kill them. Hugh's operational decisions aren't my responsibility. Operational decisions. He'd reduce murder to corporate language. You're helping him escape justice. I'm executing a contract. 48 more hours, Dad. Just stay quiet. Footsteps, moving away. I sat with that coffee cup in my hands and understood the son I'd raised was gone. Whatever stood on the other side of that door had nothing inside it that resembled the boy who'd cried at his mother's funeral. 2 hours later, the chain rattled again. The door swung open. Prescott stood in the hallway, relaxed, supremely confident. 5 minutes, he said. Basement bathroom. The door stays open. I'm not going to run. I know. You're 64 years old with a bad shoulder. You're a writer, not an action hero. He gestured toward the stairs. I followed him down to the basement. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic. Blood. Sweat. The basement looked like a field hospital gauze scattered across the floor. Bottles of peroxide and ointment on an overturned crate. The LED lantern still burned. Hugh lay on the cot, propped on pillows, his shoulder freshly bandaged. Color had returned to his face. His eyes tracked me as I crossed to the small bathroom in the corner. "Don't try anything stupid, Dad," Prescott said from the stairs. Hugh's voice came from the cot. He's right, you know. You never were good at the physical stuff. I stepped into the bathroom, barely more than a closet with a toilet and sink. The door didn't lock. I could feel both of them watching. I used the toilet, washed my hands. The water ran cold. My reflection in the cracked mirror looked 20 years older than 2 days ago. When I stepped out, Hugh was still watching me, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. "I read your book," he said. I froze. Hugh pointed to the shelf near the water heater. There, spine out among boxes of my father's old ledgers, sat the dust-covered copy of The Ghost Protocol. "Read it 3 times while I was locked away," Hugh continued. "You wrote me perfectly. The psychology, the way of thinking, the blind spots we all have when we believe the system failed us." My knees buckled. I sat down hard on a storage crate. "You handed me the exact map to become the man you fictionalized," Hugh said. "Every chapter, every character choice. You understood me better than I understood myself." "You weren't innocent," I heard myself say, like I believed. Hugh's smile was cold, grateful. "I was innocent of that specific crime. Wrong place, wrong time, corrupt cops. DNA proved it eventually." He shifted on the cot. "But your book taught me exactly how not to get caught the next time. What responsibility does a writer bear when the character they created, with empathy and depth, walks off the page and uses that blueprint to kill 3 people in the real world? The protagonist in your novel," Hugh said, "Marcus Thorne. You made him sympathetic, intelligent, methodical. You showed how a wrongfully convicted man could use everything the system taught him and turn it into something the system couldn't touch." "It was fiction," I whispered. "It was a roadmap." Chapter 14. Marcus explains how to layer shell companies. Chapter 19, how to move across borders. Chapter 23, how to identify security weaknesses in high-value targets. Hugh's eyes gleamed. "You wrote the perfect criminal. I just had to become him." Prescott stood on the stairs, silent, watching with no expression. "The guards in Seattle," I said. "Did Marcus teach you that too?" "Marcus taught me that sometimes casualties are unavoidable if you want to complete the mission." Chapter 28. The armored car scene. I wanted to vomit, wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Because sitting there, staring at a man I'd interviewed with empathy and immortalized with craft, I understood the terrible truth. I'd spent 10 years researching Hugh Bennett, 6 hours in that prison interview room, months writing his psychological profile, making him deep, complex, human. 10 years of research, 2.1 million copies sold, a literary award for profound psychological insight, and sitting in that basement looking at a wanted murderer who was thanking me for teaching him his craft, I understood I didn't just write about Hugh Bennett. I created him. And now he was lying 10 feet away from me, smiling like I'd given him the greatest gift of his life. Prescott forced me back upstairs before I could process what Hugh had just confessed. The guilt would have to wait. The knock was heavy, authoritative, unmistakable Curtis Griffin's signature 3-rap pattern he'd used for 45 years, and I was gagged, bound, and watching through gaps in the floorboards as my best friend stood 10 meters below me with absolutely no idea I was there. Prescott moved fast. 1 second I was climbing the stairs back to the reading room. The next, his hand shoved a cloth into my mouth and yanked it tight behind my head. I tried to fight, but he was 41 years younger and fueled by desperate calculation. He forced my hands behind my back, zip-tied my wrists, and dragged me away from the window to the floor near the mezzanine railing. "One sound," Prescott hissed in my ear. "One noise, and I'll tell him you went crazy and attacked me first. He'll believe me, Dad. He always does." Then the knock came again. 3 heavy raps. Pause. 2 more. "That's Curtis. That's his knock. He knows that's his knock." 3 raps. Pause. 2 more. 45 years of friendship in a rhythm. I thrashed against the zip ties. Prescott's hand clamped over the gag holding my jaw shut. His eyes were ice. Footsteps below. Prescott moving toward the door. I watched through the gaps in the old wooden floorboards as my son's shoulders straightened his face, relaxing into a mask I'd never seen before. Warm open the perfect, dutiful son. The door opened. "Sheriff Griffin," Prescott said. His voice was light, natural. "Good to see you." Prescott. Curtis Griffin's voice. 65 years old today, his birthday and county sheriff for 2 decades. My closest friend for 45 years. "Is your dad around? I've called him several times. Can't get through." "He's up in Portland visiting an old friend sheriff." Left his phone behind by mistake. You know how he gets when he's writing completely absent-minded. A pause. I could see Curtis's boots through the floorboards. Brown leather, polished. The same boots he'd worn to Margaret's funeral. Portland, Curtis said. When did he leave? Yesterday afternoon. Said he'd be back tomorrow, maybe the day after. Wanted some quiet time to work on the new manuscript. The lie was flawless, delivered with exactly the right mix of casual concern and mild amusement. Prescott had thought of everything: the absent-minded writer, the forgotten phone, the vague timeline that couldn't be easily checked. 45 years of friendship. Curtis was best man at my wedding. He helped me bury Margaret. He knows me better than anyone alive. And he was standing 10 meters away, asking my son where I was believing every word of the lie. Mind if I come in for a second? Curtis asked. My heart stopped. Of course, Prescott said. The door opened wider. Curtis's boots crossed the threshold. I could see him now through the Gap's Navy uniform belt with radio and utility, belt clipboard under one arm. He moved with the careful awareness of a man who'd spent 20 years walking into dangerous situations. His gaze swept the interior. Professional. Thorough. And for exactly 1 second I saw it clearly from above his eyes paused on the basement stairwell. 1 second. Long enough to notice. Not long enough to commit. The FBI is combing this sector, Curtis said, turning back to Prescott. Fugitive from a Seattle heist. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. You spot anything out of the ordinary, you alert me immediately. Understand? Absolutely, sir. Will do. Anyone strange hanging around unusual cars? Anything at all? Nothing, Sheriff. It's been quiet. Curtis nodded. His hand rested on his belt near his radio. I watched his profile, the sharp jaw, the gray at his temples, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a bar fight we'd broken up together 30 years ago. Curtis, I'm here. I'm right here. I threw my weight against the floor. The old wood creaked. Curtis's head turned slightly, listening. Old building, Prescott said smoothly. Settling. Dad keeps saying he should get the foundation checked, but you know how he is about spending money on this place. Curtis smiled. Stubborn as hell. Always has been. Tell me about it. They stood there for another 10 seconds. Two men having a normal conversation. A sheriff checking in. A concerned son explaining his father's whereabouts. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. When he gets back, Curtis said, have him call me. I want to talk about his birthday dinner next week. He keeps dodging my calls about it. I will, Sheriff. Promise. Good man. Curtis turned toward the door. No. I clawed at the floorboards. Splinters drove deep under my fingernails. Blood made my palms slick. I tried to scream through the gag, tried to make any sound that would penetrate the cloth and wood and reach my best friend's ears. Have you ever been so close to rescue that you could hear your savior's voice, smell the outside air when they opened the door, and known with absolute certainty they would leave without you? That's where I was. Take care, Prescott, Curtis said. You too, Sheriff. The door closed. Footsteps on the exterior concrete. Steady. Unhurried. Receding. I stopped fighting, lay flat on the floor with blood pooling under my palms and tears soaking into the gag. Curtis stared at the basement stairwell, just for a single second. Then he turned away. I don't know what he saw, or if he saw anything at all. All I knew was that the sound of his receding footsteps was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard in my entire life. My best friend, walking away, while I bled into the floorboards 10 meters above him. Prescott cut my zip ties an hour later. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had just happened. He simply removed the gag, freed my wrists, and locked the door again. I stood at the reading room window, hands still trembling, watching the empty street, where Curtis's patrol car had disappeared. At 12:15 p.m., my neighbor, Ethel Butler, stepped into her garden, looked directly up at my locked window, and placed her right hand firmly over her left chest for exactly 3 seconds. ACIA field signal I'd written into my 4th novel 7 years ago. I pressed my palms against the cold glass, staring down at her. She held my gaze, deliberate, unflinching. Then she repeated the gesture, right hand over left chest, held, 3 seconds, dropped. Slower this time, making absolutely certain I saw. Right hand over left chest, 3 seconds, exactly as I wrote it. My breath fogged the window. My hands went numb against the glass. Chapter 7, page 143. I spent 3 months researching that signal. It was an old Cold War communication technique discontinued in the 80s when technology made it obsolete. operatives used it in public spaces when they couldn't speak a way to confirm identity and relay basic status without words. The meaning was specific, precise, 3 words encoded in a simple gesture. I am aware. Ethel turned and walked back into her house. No wave, no smile. Just that signal executed twice, and then gone. She's not just watching. She's telling me she's operational. I sank back from the window, legs giving out. Sat hard on the floor. 2 years of apple pies, 2 years of friendly small talk. Ethel Butler had moved to Beaverton in 2017. The same year I published that 4th novel, The Silent Protocol, the one that detailed Cold War tradecraft and CIA field communications, the one that sold moderately well but never hit bestseller lists. She'd read it. She had to have read it, because nobody executes a field signal that precisely unless they've been trained. And I never once asked why a woman her age had hands that never trembled. The dropped paper yesterday morning, the strange phone number format, her steady fingers when she picked it up, the blinking light at midnight. She's been watching this building, maybe longer than Prescott has been planning. A 68-year-old woman who bakes apple pies and knows Cold War CIA field signals from a novel I published 7 years ago. Who is Ethel Butler, really? Retired still active observer asset. And more importantly, what action was she taking right now? The signal had 3 parts encoded in that hand gesture. I am aware. I am taking action. Trust me. Trust me. I'd written those words into Chapter 7, explaining how field operatives used this exact signal to communicate with civilians caught in dangerous situations. How it meant, help is coming. Stay calm. Do not compromise yourself. I'd researched it thoroughly. Interviewed a retired CIA officer who'd worked Berlin in the 70s. Made sure every detail was accurate. Now my own research was being used to tell me someone out there knew I was locked in this room. Someone trained, capable, already moving. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood floor and allowed myself the smallest fragment of hope. 2 hours later, that hope curdled into rage. At 2 p.m., I heard Prescott's voice below and pressed my ear flat against the floorboards. His tone was sharp, cold, the lawyer voice he used when he wanted compliance. Imogene, I've already told you. You didn't see anything. Silence. She must have been on the phone. I don't care what you think you saw, Prescott continued. You know absolutely nothing. Do you understand me? Another pause. Longer. Then his voice dropped lower, more threatening. Your son is only residing here legally because of my legal intervention. Do you want that to continue? My hands clenched against the floorboards. Imogene Burns, 47 years old, single mother, Guatemalan immigrant who'd worked for our family for 15 years. Her teenage son, Daniel, 16 years old, born in the U.S., but living with documentation challenges I'd never fully understood. Prescott had helped them. Pro bono legal work, he'd said. Immigration paperwork. Status verification. I'd been proud of him. Then stay quiet, Prescott said. It's that simple. The call cut off, footsteps moving away. I rolled onto my back, staring at the water-stained ceiling. He is leveraging a mother's deepest fear to choke out a witness. I lay on the floorboards and thought, this is the child I taught the law to. I hoped he would use it to shield the vulnerable. Instead, he is wielding it as a blade to terrorize them. Imogene had seen something. Probably saw Prescott bringing Hugh into the building at 2 a.m. on November 3rd. Maybe saw more medical supplies being carried in unusual activity, the black SUV parked where it shouldn't be. And Prescott had weaponized her love for her son. Stay quiet or I'll destroy your family. Not explicit. Never explicit. Prescott was too smart for direct threats. But the message was crystal clear. Your son's legal status depends on your silence. A 50-year-old woman who cleaned houses for a living, who'd brought soup to Margaret when she was dying, who'd never asked for anything except fair wages and respect. And my son had turned her compliance into a hostage situation. I thought about the SUV with no plates, the casual mention of operational decisions when discussing 3 murders, the flat, emotionless tone when he'd said, I know, about the dead security guards. Prescott had crossed every moral line I'd tried to teach him not to cross. And now he was using the law, the thing I'd encouraged him to study, to master, to wield for good, as a weapon against a terrified mother. He is threatening a defenseless woman, using her son, her child, as a hostage to guarantee silence. And if he's willing to do that to Imogene, what else is my son capable of? I lay on those cold floorboards and realized I didn't know him at all anymore. The real question was, did I ever... But maybe I'd never known anyone. Maybe I'd spent my entire life writing about people while fundamentally misunderstanding the ones closest to me. For 52 years, I'd walked past that landscape painting my father created the Oregon wilderness, in watercolors the mountains he loved, and I'd never once lifted it off the wall to see what he'd hidden behind it, because I was too terrified to know the truth. It hung opposite me now, faded, the colors dulled by decades of sunlight filtering through the reading room window. My father had painted it in 1971, back when the heritage was new, and he still believed in clean starts and honest work. I was 12 when he showed me what lay behind it. We'd been alone in this room, a Sunday afternoon. He'd lifted the canvas carefully off its hooks and revealed the antique wall, safe built directly into the studs. Black iron combination lock, the kind you'd find in a railroad office from the 1920s. In there lies something I am not proud of, he'd said. His voice had been quiet, ashamed. But I leave it so that you will eventually need to know the truth. Then he'd hung the painting back up and never mentioned it again. He died when I was 25, 40 years ago. I inherited the heritage, kept it running for another 33 years. Closed it in 2017 when maintaining it became too painful. 52 years. I lived alongside this room, this painting, this wall, and I never asked because I was terrified of the answer. I wrote 23 novels about uncovering the truth, about facing hard realities, about moral courage, characters who dug into dark secrets and paid the price for knowledge. And for 52 years, I chose ignorance over knowledge, because I preferred the comfortable lie to the devastating truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 5 p.m., the lock clicked. Prescott stepped through the door, actually entered the room for the first time since locking me inside. No stun device this time, no threats. He closed the door behind him and sat in the wooden chair across from me. Just two men in a small room. Do you want to know why I'm doing this, Dad? His voice was calm, almost conversational, like we were discussing his cases over Sunday coffee. I nodded. My throat was too dry to speak. Prescott leaned back, crossing his arms. He didn't look angry anymore, didn't look desperate or calculating. He looked like a lawyer presenting evidence that would destroy everything. Not for money, he said, not entirely. He paused, let the words settle. I discovered something about our family, about grandfather, about you. My hands clenched against my knees. 14 months ago, Prescott continued, I was auditing old archival legal records at my firm. Routine work, dusty files from the 80s nobody had touched in decades. He uncrossed his arms, leaned forward. I found something odd. Financial transactions routed through the Heritage Bookstore's business accounts. Highly anomalous patterns, amounts that didn't match inventory or sales records. So I investigated. I couldn't breathe. Grandfather laundered money for a crime syndicate. 8 years, 1981 to 89. The words landed like physical blows. He had gambling debts, Prescott said, compounding interest. The syndicate offered him a solution, use the bookstore as a pass-through for dirty money, and they'd forgive everything. So he did. My father's voice echoed across 52 years, something I am not proud of. Millions moved through those accounts, Prescott continued. Layered, cleaned, perfectly documented to look like legitimate rare book sales. He ran it for 8 years before he died. Then it just stopped. Prescott's eyes locked on mine. Did you know, Dad, I didn't move? Or did you just pretend not to know like you do with everything else? My silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20, 30. What legacy do we actually pass down, the stories we tell about ourselves? Or the secrets we bury in wall safes and hope our children never find? Your silence tells me everything I need to know, Prescott said quietly. He was right. I knew. Not the specifics. Not the amounts or the timeline or the syndicate's name. But I'd known something was wrong. My father's strange hours in the 80s. The way he'd flinch when police cars drove past. The locked basement office I was never allowed to enter. The sudden influx of cash that saved the bookstore from foreclosure in 1983. I'd been 17, old enough to notice, old enough to ask questions. I chose not to. When he died in 1995 heart attack at his desk, sudden and absolute, I'd inherited the bookstore and all its secrets. Found the neat ledgers, the accounts that didn't quite add up, the paper trail that led to questions I didn't want answered. So I'd closed the books, literally, boxed them up, stored them in the basement, chose ignorance. Chose the comfortable narrative my father was a good man who ran an honest bookstore and loved literature and died too young. Never mind the safe behind the painting. Never mind the locked office. Never mind the money. But I spent my whole childhood, Prescott said, listening to you tell me about grandfather's integrity, his honesty, his moral courage standing up to corruption. His voice cracked slightly. You built him into a legend, the man who testified against criminals, the hero who sacrificed everything for truth. I stared at the painting on the wall, the mountains, the wilderness, the careful brushstrokes. But he wasn't a hero, Prescott continued. He was a criminal, and you knew. You've always known. I was 12, I whispered, finally finding my voice, when he showed me that safe. And you never opened it. No. Why not? Because I was terrified of what I'd find. Because ignorance felt safer than knowledge. Because the comfortable lie was easier to live with than the devastating truth. Because I said I didn't want to know. Prescott nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed a diagnosis. So you understand, he said, why I'm doing this. Why I approached Hugh. Why I took the money. I didn't understand. Not at all. Our family legacy. Prescott said standing is built on crime and lies. Grandfather laundered millions. You inherited his business and pretended not to know. And you raised me on stories about integrity and moral courage, stories you knew were fiction. He moved toward the door. I'm just following the family tradition, Dad. I'm just being honest about it. Prescott stood at the door, hand on the knob, ready to leave me with that devastating comparison. Then he turned back. Prescott leaned back and delivered the final blow. Hugh Bennett knows everything about grandfather's laundering operations, because senior members of that same crime syndicate told him in prison that's why he chose the heritage, knowing I wouldn't dare contact police without exposing my father's crimes. He holds the trump card, Dad, not me. The words settled like ash. Hugh hadn't chosen this building randomly, hadn't stumbled into Prescott's offer by coincidence. He'd engineered it, deliberately, precisely, because he knew my father's history, knew I'd spent decades protecting that legacy, knew I wouldn't easily call law enforcement when doing so would drag everything into the light, the money laundering, the syndicate connections, the carefully constructed fiction of my father's integrity. I was trapped not by my son's plan. I was trapped by my own family's buried crimes. And you genuinely believe you are smarter than a man like him? I asked. Prescott's expression flickered, just for a second, something that might have been doubt. Then it hardened again. I used to think so. The door closed. The lock clicked. Footsteps receded down the stairs. I sat in the gathering darkness and processed what I'd just learned. Hugh hadn't just read my novel. He'd researched my entire family, learned our secrets, identified our vulnerabilities. And he'd offered Prescott a deal he knew my son, angry about family lies, desperate for his own future, couldn't refuse. The trap within the trap within the trap. At 7 p.m. alone in the locked room, my hand instinctively went to my tweed jacket pocket. The familiar rectangular shape. My vintage cassette recorder. I'd carried it everywhere out of sheer professional habit for 20 years. A relic from my early research days when I'd interview sources and record their stories. Most writers had moved to smartphones, cloud storage, digital apps. I'd kept the cassette. Prescott mocked it constantly. You're living in the past, Dad. Just use an iPhone. But I knew what my son didn't. My son spent a year telling me I was a dinosaur for using tape. Get an iPhone, Dad. But I learned something writing 23 crime novels. The old tools survive because they work. Tape can't be hacked from a distance. It can't be deleted by a remote server. It holds its physical integrity before a judge. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, checked the tiny LED indicator in the dim light. Still running. I'd turned it on this morning out of pure habit, the same habit that had driven me for 2 decades, always recording, always capturing, just in case. Prescott had spoken for hours, monologues about the money, the plan Hugh's background grandfather's crimes, the threat to Imogene, the timeline for crossing into Canada. Every word captured on magnetic tape, every confession, every dollar amount, every co-conspirator name. I checked the counter. 40 minutes of the 90-minute tape remained. Plenty. Tape cannot be hacked, cannot be wiped remotely, cannot be geolocated, and when a federal court demands admissible evidence, magnetic tape is something no lawyer can argue away. Prescott, you mocked my cassette recorder a dozen times, but you never bothered to ask why I still rely on tape instead of an iPhone. I slipped the recorder back into my pocket and felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not quite, but strategy. Night fell. The reading room sank into pitch blackness except for the orange glow of streetlights filtering through the window. I sat on the floor, cataloging everything I knew. Prescott accepted payment for security blueprints. Hugh deliberately chose this location because of my father's history. Ethel Butler was executing some kind of external operation. The cassette was tracking everything, and roughly 48 hours remained before Hugh's border crossing attempt. 48 hours left. I need to strike before that clock expires. I stood, walked to the landscape painting. My father's careful brush strokes, the Oregon wilderness, mountains he'd loved. I lifted it away from the wall. The safe sat embedded in the drywall black iron combination lock, exactly as I remembered from age 12. No key. These vintage residential models used basic 4-digit combinations. My father was a man of strict, unbreakable habit. I tried his birth year, 1923. The dial resisted. Incorrect. The year the bookstore opened, 1972. Incorrect. Then I dialed the year I was born, 1959. The lock clicked. The door swung open. What does a father leave behind when he knows his legacy is corrupted? A warning, a confession, or a sealed emergency beacon you hope your child never has to use. I reached inside with trembling hands. A thick leather-bound dossier, heavy, dense with paper. A heavily yellowed manila envelope sealed with red wax. My father had left me a device. Not just the dossier evidence probably of everything he'd done. Not just the envelope, maybe a confession, an explanation, an apology. But an actual emergency beacon, charged, ready, waiting 52 years for the moment someone would need it. My father had prepared for this exact day. The question is, what was he preparing for? I set the emergency beacon aside and pulled out the dossier. Even in the dim light from the street, I could see the careful handwriting on the cover. Transaction records, 1981 to 1989. Below that in smaller letters, for Howard, when the day comes that you cannot look away any longer. The safe opened, and inside was a truth 52 years in the making. I held the dossier in my hands, heavy, solid, undeniable, and understood. My father hadn't just hidden evidence of his crimes. He'd created a complete record, names, dates, amounts, routes, everything needed to destroy the people who'd forced him into this. The envelope remained sealed. The emergency beacon sat cold and ready, and I had 48 hours to decide what to do with all of it. I sat on the floor with the emergency beacon, the envelope, and the dossier spread before me like evidence at a crime scene. Under the tight beam of my pocket flashlight, my father's meticulous handwriting filled page after page of transaction logs, names. I recognized dates that spanned 8 years and dollar amounts that totaled $4.7 million in laundered money. $4.7 million in the 1980s, rooted entirely through a quiet bookstore in suburban Oregon. The first page was dated January 1981, the last entry December 1989. 8 years of systematic documented corruption. Each transaction was recorded with clinical precision routing sequences, account numbers, dates, amounts. My father had kept perfect records of his own crimes. The names jumped out at me like ghosts from my childhood. Thomas Garrett, real estate developer. His daughter was in my high school class. Richard Calloway, city councilman. He'd spoken at my graduation. Daniel Whitmore, federal judge. He'd married my wife's cousin. Prominent families. Political connections. Legitimate businesses that needed dirty money cleaned. And they'd used my father's bookstore as the washing machine. I traced my finger down one page. A single transaction from March 1983. $127,000, routed through an estate book sale, layered across 3 shell accounts, emerged clean in a Portland investment fund. Another entry from June 1985, $89,000, disguised as rare manuscript purchases from European dealers who didn't exist. Page after page, year after year. Was my father truly the man I thought he was? Or did I fall in love with a character he invented? I closed the dossier and pressed my palms against my eyes. Memories surfaced, clearer now, darker. My father's suffocating anxiety throughout the late 80s. The way his hands would shake when certain phone calls came through. The cryptic midnight conversations I'd hear through my bedroom walls. His voice low, pleading, desperate. The well-dressed men who frequented the Heritage but never once touched a book. I remember those men now. Expensive suits, gold watches. They'd walk through the door, barely glance at the shelves, exchange 3 sentences with my father, and leave. As a child, I thought they were rude customers. They weren't customers at all. They were checking on their asset. making sure my father stayed compliant, ensuring the money kept flowing. I remembered something else. In 1987, a legitimate developer offered my father $2 million for the heritage property. Prime location, commercial zoning, perfect for redevelopment. My father refused. I'd asked him why. We could have retired, moved somewhere quiet. He could have stopped working 70-hour weeks managing a struggling bookstore. He'd looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "Some things can't be sold, son. This place is complicated." I thought he meant sentimental attachment. I thought Dad refused to sell because he loved this place. He didn't own it. He was keeping it for them. The building wasn't his to sell. It was structural infrastructure for a criminal network. My father was a custodian, not an owner. A glorified employee of the syndicate. I opened the dossier again, flipped to the final pages. The transaction stopped abruptly in December 1989. No explanation, no final entry. Just silence. My father died 6 years later, 1995. Heart attack, sudden, absolute. I was 36, still writing novels, still believing in his integrity. The estate went through probate. Standard process. Except for one thing. The executor, a lawyer I'd never met before and never saw again, told me there was inherited business debt that had to be satisfied before probate could close. $300,000, payable to an anonymous escrow account, no name attached, no explanation given. I was told it was non-negotiable. Pay or the estate would remain frozen indefinitely. So I paid, drained my savings, took out loans, satisfied the mysterious debt, and moved on with my life. $300,000. I thought it was inherited debt. It was a ransom. My father bought our way out. Can you ever truly escape your father's sins? Or do they just lie dormant for a generation, waiting to rise again through your children? I understood now. My father had run that operation for 8 years, 1981 to 1989, because he had no choice. Gambling debts, syndicate pressure, the classic trap. But in 1989, he'd stopped. Somehow negotiated an exit. Kept meticulous records as insurance, as leverage, as proof he could burn them all if they came for him. And when he died in 1995, the syndicate demanded one final payment, $300,000 to sever the Ross family from their network permanently. My father had orchestrated it from beyond the grave. He'd protected me, bought my freedom, made sure I could walk away clean, and I'd paid that ransom without ever knowing what it really was. 28 years later, I was locked in a room above that same bookstore, and the son of the man who'd sacrificed everything to buy my freedom was willingly selling himself back into the same darkness. And 35 years later, that ancient debt is demanding payment through my son. History doesn't just repeat itself. It collects interest. I picked up the yellowed envelope, still sealed, my name written in my father's careful script. To Howard, inside would be his explanation, his confession, his apology, maybe instructions for what to do with the dossier, maybe a warning. I set it down unopened. Not yet. I needed to think, to process, to understand the full scope before I heard his voice from the grave. The emergency beacon sat beside me, silent, old, waiting. My father had left me 3 things, evidence that could destroy powerful people, a letter I was terrified to read, and a device I prayed I'd never need. My father purchased our freedom, at a price he chose never to whisper to me, and now 35 years later, that ancient debt is demanding payment, re-engineered through his own grandson. I looked at the cassette recorder in my jacket pocket. Still running, still capturing. 2 tools my father had given me without knowing it, the obsolete technology Prescott mocked, and the documented truth he'd spent 8 years compiling, both waiting for the exact moment I'd need them. I sat with those weapons until exhaustion claimed me slumped against the wall, the dossier still open in my lap, the emergency beacon cold against my thigh. Gray dawn broke through the window, my second morning as a prisoner. At 6 a.m. on my second morning, locked in this room, Ethel Butler stepped into her misty garden, looked directly at my window, and raised 3 fingers, pulled them to a fist, extended them again. 3 deliberate iterations, then pointed toward the eastern intersection where I suddenly understood her tactical team was positioned. I stood at the glass watching her perform the sequence with absolute precision. 3 fingers, 3 iterations, then the eastern corner. She wasn't just signaling. She was communicating specific tactical information. I followed her gesture toward the intersection. The old defunct public telephone booth stood on the corner, rusted graffiti tagged, scheduled for demolition for 5 years but somehow never removed. That phone booth, the number she gave me. Her team is there. The paper she dropped at my door, the strangely formatted number without an area code, not a doctor's office, a tactical field line, and her team was positioned exactly at those coordinates, using the phone booth as a staging point. I'm not alone. I haven't been alone for a single second. Ethel turned and walked back into her house. No wave, no smile. Just that signal executed 3 times to ensure I understood, and a clear indication of her team's location. I stepped back from the window, legs shaking. A 68-year-old neighbor running counter-hostage operations. She knew before Curtis, possibly before I did. How long had Ethel Butler been watching this building? I replayed every interaction with her over the past 2 years. The apple pies delivered on the second Tuesday of every month, exactly when Imogene cleaned the bookstore. The casual questions about whether I was planning any trips. The way she'd positioned her garden chairs to have a direct sightline to the Heritage's entrance. She'd been monitoring the sector, not casually, professionally. I am not alone. I haven't been alone for a single second over the past 36 hours. The 68-year-old neighbor who delivers pies, the woman who monitored this perimeter before I even recognized the threat, is actively running a counterintelligence operation. And I still don't know her real name, but she knew mine, knew my novels, knew the CIA field signals I'd researched and published, and she'd used my own work to prove she was operational. The question wasn't whether she could help. The question was, what was she waiting for? At 9 a.m. the lock clicked. Prescott opened the door. "Basement," he said. "You need your heart medication." I didn't have heart medication. We both knew that. This was a scouting run. Prescott wanted me to see Hugh was stable healing, almost ready to move. I followed him down the narrow stairs. The basement smelled cleaner today, less antiseptic, less blood. Hugh had clearly been mobile enough to clean up the medical debris. He sat on the cot, propped against pillows, reading an old paperback I recognized from the fiction section upstairs. Tom Clancy, Clear and Present Danger. He looked up as I entered. His eyes were sharper today, alert, analytical. "Do you know what people in my circle call your son?" Hugh asked. I shook my head. "Junior." The word landed flat, simple, heavy. Prescott stood on the stairs silent, watching this exchange with no expression. "Junior," Hugh repeated, the highly specific nomenclature utilized exclusively by the old syndicate to classify the direct descendants of original members. He set the paperback aside. "Your boy wasn't the first Ross to bridge the gap and approach my associates." My chest tightened. His grandfather ran operations for the very same men I served. Different era, same blood. Hugh smiled, not cruel, just factual. "When your son contacted me 18 months ago, he didn't need to explain his family history. We already knew. The old-timers remember your father, remember the heritage, remember the accounts that ran through here in the 80s. 18 months. Prescott had been planning this for a year and a half. He came to us," Hugh continued. "Not the other way around. Walked into a bar in Portland that only certain people know about. Asked for an introduction to someone who could use his legal expertise. Someone who understood legacy operations." Prescott shifted on the stairs. I couldn't read his face. The first thing the old man asked him, Hugh said, was, "Are you Ross's boy?" And when your son said yes, the old man laughed, said, "Junior's come home." Can you ever truly sever your bloodline from its sins? Or does each generation just reinterpret the same corruption in new language, believing themselves to be different until the cycle closes around them? "Your father bought your freedom," Hugh said quietly. "Paid the ransom, severed the connection, made sure you'd never have to touch this world." He gestured toward Prescott. "And 35 years later, your son walked back in voluntarily. Called it reclaiming his birthright. Called it taking what was owed to him." Hugh's eyes held something that might have been pity. "The syndicate has a saying, the sons always come back. They just don't know they're doing it." Prescott's voice came from the stairs, cold, defensive. "I made my own choice." "Sure you did," Hugh said. "Just like I made mine. Just like your grandfather made his. We all think we're choosing, but the network recognizes its own blood. I stood in that basement, staring at my son on the stairs and the fugitive on the cot, and understood. Junior. My son has voluntarily enlisted in the exact underworld his grandfather sacrificed his life to escape. A perfect circle closing after 40 years. And I was standing directly between 2 generations of sin, wondering what is the true heritage of the Ross name. "Time's up," Prescott said. I walked back up the stairs, my son's footsteps behind me, and returned to my locked room with that word echoing in my skull. Junior. Not Prescott. Not son, not lawyer, Junior. The title his grandfather had worn in secret, the legacy my father had died trying to bury, and the identity Prescott had claimed with pride. Back in the locked reading room, that word echoed in my skull like a death sentence. Junior, the legacy reborn. How much corruption can fit in the gap between floorboards? At 11:30 a.m., I lay flat on the reading room floor, ear pressed to the narrow gap between the old oak boards, and found out. The cassette recorder sat beside me, spools turning silently. I'd activated it the moment I heard Prescott's footsteps below, pacing in tight circles, his voice rising and falling in a phone conversation I couldn't quite make out. Until I heard the number. 3.2 million. My blood froze. I pressed my ear harder against the gap. Splinters bit into my cheek. I didn't care. Prescott's voice came clearer, now sharp and professional. Layered across shell accounts over 14 months, Brandon and Neville finalized the transit documentation Tuesday. Everything's in place. 14 months. Brandon and Neville. My son's law firm, my son's colleagues. I'd met them both. Brandon Merrick, sharp-dressed Harvard Law, specialized in white-collar defense. Neville Strauss, older, calculating 20 years at the firm, handling corporate litigation. Both corrupt. Both co-conspirators in a conspiracy that had been running for over a year, while I'd sat in my house writing novels about fictional criminals. Prescott continued, his voice dropping lower. Hugh moves this Thursday regardless of weather. November 21st, but that plan just moved up. The Canadian contact confirmed the route through Blaine. 3:45 a.m. No variance. Thursday, November 21st, 5 days from now. Hugh Bennett wanted for triple murder, lying in my basement with a healing wound, would cross into Canada in 5 days. Unless I stopped it. I thought of my father, not the man who'd run money laundering operations in the 80s. Further back, 1967. Detroit. He'd been 32 years old, working as an accountant for a manufacturing company. He'd discovered the books were cooked, the union funds siphoned the workers' pensions, stolen by men in expensive suits who thought they were untouchable. He'd testified. Federal grand jury, put 3 men in prison. 6 months later, someone ran his car off the road. He survived with a broken back and permanent nerve damage. The message was clear: testify again, and you won't be so lucky. He'd moved to Oregon, opened the Heritage, tried to start clean, and 20 years later, the same kind of men had found him anyway, trapped him, turned him into exactly what he'd once fought against. Dad died stopping men like this, and I raised one. Prescott's footsteps moved across the floor below. I tracked the sound, my ear following him from the front room toward the basement stairs. His voice faded slightly but remained audible. The total, a pause. Then 3.2 million across 4 clients. Hugh's the proof of concept. The others move in January and March. 3.2 million. I did the math in my skull. Prescott had told me 800,000 for Hugh. If the total was 3.2 million and each client paid the same rate. 4 fugitives, minimum. Hugh wasn't a one-time deal. He was the beta test. My son wasn't a misguided helper protecting one desperate man. He was an architect, a systems designer, building a corporate fugitive transit network that would move high-value criminals across borders for just under $1 million per head. The reading room floor felt like my father's grave. I lay there, cassette still recording, and understood the full scope of what Prescott had built. Not a crime, an enterprise, with infrastructure, personnel, quarterly targets. Brandon handling documentation, Neville managing the financial layers, Prescott coordinating logistics. A law firm turned criminal cartel, and I'd raised the man who designed it. Prescott's voice faded completely. Silence below. I lay motionless, barely breathing, listening for any sound. Then I heard it, creaking, the basement stairs. Prescott was coming up. I grabbed the cassette recorder, fumbling with trembling hands. Rolled sideways behind the bookshelf just as I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the reading room door. The lock clicked. I held my breath. The door swung open. Prescott's shadow crossed the threshold. I could see it through the gap between the bookshelf and wall, a sliver of darkness moving across the floor. He stood there, silent, looking around the room. I pressed my back against the wall behind the shelf. The cassette recorder clutched to my chest. If he walked 3 more steps, he'd see me. 3 steps. That's all it would take. I heard him breathe, heard the rustle of fabric as he shifted his weight. Then his phone buzzed. He answered immediately. His voice was quieter now, cautious. I can't talk long. Dad's upstairs. I'll call you back from the car. The door closed. The lock clicked. Footsteps receded down the hallway. I stayed frozen behind the bookshelf for a full minute, listening to my own heartbeat, thunder in my ears. Dad's upstairs. He knew I was here, knew I was locked in this room, knew I was helpless. But he didn't know about the cassette recorder. Didn't know I'd been lying on the floor, ear to the gap, capturing every word of his phone conversation. 3.2 million, 14 months. 4 fugitives. Brandon and Neville. Thursday departure at 3:45 a.m. through Blaine, Washington. Every detail, every name, every number, preserved on magnetic tape in an unhackable analog format. I pulled myself up from behind the bookshelf and sat on the floor, back against the wall, cassette recorder in my lap. The spools had stopped turning. The tape was full. 90 minutes of evidence. Prescott's confessions. His phone calls. His coordinates. His timeline. Everything a federal prosecutor would need to dismantle a criminal conspiracy. Everything except a way out of this locked room. I looked at the window, Ethel's house across the street, her tactical team positioned at the eastern intersection. 5 days until Hugh crossed the border. 5 days to figure out how to use this evidence. 5 days to decide if I was willing to destroy my son to stop what he'd become. I stood at the reading room window watching Prescott's silhouette move through the garden below. The cassette in my pocket contained his admission enough to end him, the weight of it pressed against my ribs like a second heart, beating out a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Your son, your son, your son, asterisk. But the novelist in me recognized something crucial. This wasn't the climax. It was barely the second act. I returned to the desk and spread out everything I'd gathered: the cassette, my father's ledger, the photographs from Prescott's study, the timeline I'd constructed. 40 years of courtroom strategy condensed into a single tactical matrix. If Prescott had helped one fugitive cross the border, he'd developed a system. Systems had patterns. Patterns had vulnerabilities. My hands moved across the paper, connecting dots with the precision I'd once used to dismantle alibis. Hugh's arrival on October 12th, the basement renovations Prescott had commissioned in September, soundproofing for your writing retreat, he'd said, the new lock on the wine cellar, his sudden interest in Canadian property law last spring, the pattern of his absences, always mid-month, always 3 days. The pattern emerged like a photograph in developing fluid. This had been planned for months. I needed more than an admission of harboring Hugh. I needed the full architecture of the conspiracy names, dates, money trails, everyone involved. Prescott had given me a confession, but I needed him to give me the entire operation. The question was how to extract it without him realizing what he'd revealed. I glanced at the clock, 2:47 p.m. In my pocket, I had my father's microcassette recorder, the one he'd used for dictating case notes. Prescott had seen it 1,000 times. It would seem natural in my hands, non-threatening. Just Dad taking notes for his next novel. I pressed record and set it on the desk, partially hidden behind a stack of manuscript pages. Then I called down to him. Prescott entered warily, his eyes cataloging the room. The papers, the photographs, the ledger, opened to a page dated 1984. We need to talk, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound defeated rather than tactical. I need to understand why. He sat across from me in the leather chair my father had occupied during our own difficult conversations. I watched him choose his strategy. He'd go for empathy, I predicted. Make me see Hugh as human, make me complicit in the moral calculus. Dad, what would you have done? His voice carried that reasonable tone he used when explaining difficult decisions to clients. Hugh came to me in September of 2022. Not last month, over a year ago. He was desperate. The charges against him were fabricated by a corporate machine protecting its profits. He had evidence of environmental contamination they'd hidden for decades. I'd heard versions of this story in 100 courtrooms. Before I reveal what I discovered in those photographs, I need to ask you something. If you found evidence that your own child had broken the law to help someone they believed was innocent, would you turn them in or protect them? Comment below with justice or family. I'm curious where you stand. Remember, while this story's core dilemma is real, specific details have been fictionalized for privacy. I let my silence pull more from him. Brandon put us in touch. Prescott continued, leaning forward. He handles the logistics, the transportation, the documentation, the crossing schedules. Neville manages the financial side, the payments, the transfers, keeping everything clean. My role is simple. I provide a safe house, A place where people can disappear for a few weeks before the final crossing. The heritage is perfect for it. My heart hammered, but I kept my face neutral. The crossing, Blaine, Washington. There's a crossing point 3 a.m. when the staffing is minimal. Hugh goes tomorrow night tonight, technically. November 17th at 3 a.m. He checked his watch. In about 12 hours, he'll be in Vancouver, and this will all be over. How many? I asked quietly. Prescott hesitated. This was the moment he could retreat into vagueness or step fully into the confession. I watched him calculate which truth would hurt less. Hugh is the 8th this year, he finally said. We started small. One person last February, another in April. But the need is so much greater than we anticipated. By this February, we'll be moving 8 to 10 people per month. It's become efficient. 8 to 10 per month. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. This wasn't about one FBI fugitive hiding in my basement. This wasn't even about my son making a catastrophic moral error. This was an assembly line, a full-scale underground railroad operation running through my home, using my family's reputation as cover. I looked at Prescott, my son, who I'd taught to read, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose first trial brief I'd edited, and saw someone I'd never met. Someone who'd built an entire criminal infrastructure while I'd been upstairs writing fiction about imaginary crimes. Dad, his voice pulled me back. Say something. But what was there to say? The recorder was still running, capturing every word. In my hands I held the complete blueprint of his operation. Names, dates, the crossing point, the scale of it. I had everything I needed to destroy him, and exactly 12 hours to decide if I would. The chain lock clicks open at 11:02 p.m., exactly as I wrote it in Chapter 9 of Shadows on Marble. The drafting pencil technique, the three-point pressure system, the final quarter turn that releases the tumbler without sound. Fiction becomes instruction manual. Prescott had locked me in the reading room at 5:17 p.m., right after his confession, 6 hours ago. 6 hours of sitting in darkness with the cassette recorder in my pocket and a decision I couldn't make. Turn in my son or let an assembly line of fugitives continue running through my home. But around 10:30, a third option emerged. Activate my father's silent alarm before Hugh's crossing, let the county make the decision for me. I ease the reading room door open. The hallway stretches before me in absolute darkness. No moonlight, no ambient glow from the garden. I slip off my shoes and move in stocking feet, keeping my weight on the outer edges of each footfall. The third board past the bathroom creaks. The seventh step on the main staircase groans under pressure. The landing board near the newel post betrays anyone who steps center mass. I've lived in the heritage for 43 years. I know every weakness in its bones. The descent takes 7 minutes, each step a negotiation between speed and silence. My hand trails the banister fingers, reading the carved acanthus. Leaves my father had commissioned in 1965. Below I hear breathing, shallow, rhythmic. Prescott probably in the kitchen, or Hugh in the basement. The house carries sound through its heating vents in unpredictable patterns. Fiction taught me to pick locks. Reality will teach me if I survive using them. I reach the main floor at 11:14 p.m. The reception area lies 15 feet ahead, where my father's desk still sits against the east wall. In 1976, when County Dispatch upgraded their emergency response grid, they installed silent alarm triggers in the homes of federal prosecutors and judges. Mechanical systems, pre-digital. A hidden drawer that slides 3 times in sequence sends a coded pulse through dedicated phone lines. If those lines still connect to anywhere, if the system hasn't been disconnected in the 47 years since my father's retirement, if County Dispatch still monitors frequencies from the Carter administration, I cross the reception area, each step placed with surgical precision. The desk materializes from shadow. My father's massive oak monstrosity, 8 feet long, scarred from decades of case files and coffee rings. I run my fingers along the right side panel, finding the seam. The hidden drawer releases with a whisper of wood on wood. I slide it out 3 inches. Push it closed. Out again. Closed. Out. Closed. Somewhere in the bowels of the heritage, a mechanical relay clicks. Or I imagine it does. No confirmation beep, no indicator light. Just faith in 40-year-old engineering. Then light explodes across my face. A flashlight beam industrial strength, pinning me against the desk, like an insect on cork. I throw up my hand pupils, contracting in pain. Footsteps approach from two directions, heavy boots from the kitchen, lighter steps from the basement stairs. Impressive. The voice is unfamiliar, carrying a rough Midwest flatness. 64 years old, and you still move like a church mouse. The flashlight lowers slightly. I blink away the retinal burn and see him for the first time, Hugh Bennett, 43 years old, built like a man who'd spent years in field work before the FBI made him a fugitive. Weathered face, graying temples, eyes that calculate trajectories and exit routes. The environmental whistleblower who'd turned my son into a criminal. He holds a compact black stun device with the casual competence of someone who's used one many times before. Dad? Prescott emerges from the kitchen doorway, his voice carrying disappointment rather than surprise. You picked the reading room lock. I should have expected that. He sent the signal, Hugh says, nodding toward the desk. We have 90 minutes before County responds to Heritage silent alarms. Maybe less if they upgraded the priority codes. They were waiting. They knew. The realization hits like cold water. They'd been watching, listening. Let me escape. Let me cross the house in darkness. Let me activate the alarm because they'd already planned for this contingency. Then we move early, Prescott says, checking his watch. Call Brandon. 3:45 a.m., not 3. We can still make the Blaine crossing before county units arrive. Hugh moves closer, the stun device never wavering. In the backwash of the flashlight, I see his face clearly. Now the kind of weathered determination that comes from believing absolutely in your own righteousness. Men like him don't negotiate. They don't compromise. Your father was smarter than this, Hugh says quietly. Federal prosecutor for 32 years, and he knew when to let the small fights go to win the larger war. 8 to 10 people per month, Howard. 8 to 10 families who get to stay together, instead of being torn apart by corporate lawyers and fabricated charges. You'd destroy that to stop one crossing. I'd destroy it because it's using my home as cover, I say. My voice sounds steadier than I feel. Because it's turned my son into a criminal. Because you've made me an accessory to what? Hugh interrupts. Justice. The system failed these people. We're correcting that failure. Prescott steps forward, his face tight with stress. Dad County response time to Heritage alarms averages 92 minutes. I checked the historical logs. You activated it at 11:16. They'll arrive around 12:47 a.m., maybe 100 if they're slow tonight. We'll be across the border by 4. Hugh presses the crackling edge of the stun device to my sternum. Leaning close enough, I smell coffee on his breath. Your cassette stays here, he says, gesturing toward the reading room with his free hand. So do you. When County arrives, you'll tell them it was accidental activation. Old system. Old house. You bumped the desk in the dark. They'll file a report and leave. And if I don't... Hugh's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Then Prescott loses everything. His law license, his freedom, his future, and those 8 to 10 families per month. They lose their last hope. Your choice, Howard. Your son's life or your principles. They march me back upstairs. The reading room door closes. I hear the chain lock click into place from the outside. I'm trapped again, but the alarm has been sent. 92 minutes until County arrives. 4 hours until Hugh crosses the border. At Blaine. And somewhere in my pocket, a cassette that could end all of this if the police arrive in time. If the 40-year-old alarm system still routes to active dispatch. If I'm willing to destroy my son to stop the machinery he's built. The clock is running, and I still don't know which side I'm on. They brought me back downstairs 9 minutes later. Hugh lowered the stun device and held out my car keys instead. Change of plans, he said, dangling the Mercedes fob between us. I recalculated the alarm response time. 15 minutes before county units arrive, not 92. Your father's system routes through the old emergency grid. Pre-digital. Faster priority codes. We don't have the cushion, I thought. I stood in the reception area, my back against the desk, where I'd triggered the alarm. Prescott hovered near the kitchen doorway, his face carefully blank. The flashlight beam had been redirected to the ceiling, casting all 3 of us in pale, indirect shadow. So you're leaving now, I said, not a question. We're leaving now, Hugh corrected. You drive me to Blaine, right now. You walk away clean. No conspiracy, no obstruction, no charges. You dropped off a hitchhiker at the border. That's your story when County arrives and finds an empty house. The logic was sound. The kind of tactical pivot I'd have advised a client to make when a situation deteriorated faster than anticipated. Cut losses, preserve what can be preserved, sacrifice what must be sacrificed. And Prescott, Hugh's expression didn't change. Your son stays, faces RICO money laundering, harboring fugitives across state lines. Federal charges, federal sentencing guidelines. Minimum 12 years, probably 15 with enhancements. Unless he cooperates and gives up Brandon and Neville, then maybe down to 8. The numbers landed like blows. 12 years, 15, 8 with cooperation. I watched Prescott's face as Hugh catalogued his future, searching for a reaction. Dad, no. Prescott's voice cracked perfectly. Don't listen to him. Don't leave me here. You built this operation, Hugh continued, his tone almost gentle. You made every choice that led to this moment. Your father can save himself or go down with you. But he doesn't owe you his freedom just because you share his blood. What father wouldn't save himself from a son who became the monster? The question moved through me like poison. This was the choice Hugh was offering: complicity or abandonment. Drive him to the border and walk away clean, or stay and face federal conspiracy charges beside my son. The father who raised him versus the father who survives him. How much time do I have? I asked. 12 minutes. County vehicles are already rolling. Decide. I looked at Prescott. Really looked. His shoulders trembled. His voice had broken on that last plea. His eyes glistened in the dim light, the flawless performance of a terrified son watching his father choose survival over loyalty. But his hands were perfectly steady on the doorframe. I'd seen those hands before. When he was 8 and shattered his mother's vase, he'd sobbed convincingly, but his hands hung loose at his sides, completely still. The cat hadn't done it. When he was 14, claiming older kids had robbed him, his whole body radiated violated innocence, but his hands never trembled once during the police report. The money was spent on an Xbox hidden in his closet. When he was 19, facing a cheating accusation at his disciplinary, hearing his eyes filled with tears, but his hands stayed calm throughout. The accusation was accurate. His hands don't shake. They never shake when he's lying. You're really going to abandon me? Prescott asked, his voice breaking on the word. After I trusted you with everything. I let my shoulders drop, let them see the broken father calculating his odds. It wasn't difficult. I'd carried that weight genuinely for 6 hours. I was simply performing what I actually felt. But I was also calculating exactly what game they were running, and why Prescott's hands had stayed steady through every second of it. Hugh dragged Prescott toward the reading room chair. Zip ties already out. I watched from the hallway, playing the broken father who'd chosen survival over loyalty. Hugh shoved Prescott into the seat and bound his wrists to the armrests with practiced efficiency. Then he leaned close to my son's ear and whispered, "The safe. Northeast corner of the cellar, the moment I clear out. 60 seconds, no more." We don't have a northeast corner. The Heritage's cellar was excavated in 1923, carved into bedrock, beneath the southeast quadrant of the building. My father had the architectural survey framed in his office. I studied it 1,000 times growing up. The foundation only allows access from the southeast stairwell. No northeast corner exists. Never did. The whisper was theater. A code designed for me to overhear, meant to make me panic, drive faster, stop thinking. But the impossible geography confirmed exactly what Prescott's steady hands had already told me. This entire scene was coordinated performance. "You're leaving me here for the cops." Prescott's voice broke with rehearsed betrayal, loud enough to carry. "After everything I've done for you, you should have kept your father out of it," Hugh said, his tone perfectly balanced between regret and cold pragmatism. "Now he drives you stay. That's the deal." Prescott strained against the ties, his face flushed with what looked like genuine terror. But I was watching his hands, still steady, still controlled. The ties were probably loose enough to slip within seconds. I let my shoulders drop further. "I'll drive you," I said quietly. "Just let me get my coat. It's cold." Hugh nodded. 2 minutes. I walked to the hall closet on legs that genuinely trembled, not from fear of Hugh, but from the risk of what I was about to attempt. My winter coat hung exactly where I'd left it. I slid my hand into the inner pocket and felt a small rectangular weight. The backup cassette recorder, voice-activated compact bought last spring while researching a surveillance novel. 6-hour battery. Fresh tape loaded 2 days ago, never used. I pressed record through the fabric, felt the faint mechanical vibration engage, then pulled the coat on and buttoned it carefully. The recorder settled warm against my ribs. Hugh met me at the door. 6 minutes. Let's move. I paused at the threshold, making it look like hesitation. Which Blaine crossing Peace Arch or commercial? His eyes narrowed slightly, but he answered. Truck commercial, gate 7, 3:45 a.m. exactly. Canadian transit papers. Under Foster Clark Foster. Every word spooled onto magnetic tape in my pocket. I pressed further, playing the nervous accomplice. Gate 7 skeleton crew. 2 guards on Brandon's payroll. A refrigerated truck, marked Vancouver Cold Storage. In and out in 90 seconds. Brandon waiting north side. 80,000 wired to account 4718. The network going dark until spring. Hugh was handing me a complete federal case detail by detail, believing I was too afraid to use any of it. Then Prescott's voice cut through quiet cold, stripped of all performance. Hugh, his coat. Check his coat. The temperature dropped. Hugh's hand closed on my shoulder, stopping me at the threshold. His other hand moved toward my pocket. I had exactly 1 second to decide fight run or let him find the cassette that could destroy them both. We're outside before Hugh's hand ever reaches my pocket. He grabs my elbow and propels me through the doorway into freezing November rain. The temperature has dropped 15 degrees since sunset, turning the drizzle into ice-edged needles that sting exposed skin. 2 minutes, Hugh says, scanning the darkness. We're gone before County clears the access road. He steers me toward the rear parking lot, away from the main driveway. A dark SUV idles near the property line, exhaust vapor mixing with rain. The cassette recorder presses against my ribs, still warm, still recording. Every footstep, every breath, every word Hugh speaks is spooling onto magnetic tape. Then headlights flash in the distance, 2 quick pulses from the access road, maybe a quarter mile out. Hugh freezes his grip, tightening on my arm. County response, he mutters, earlier than projected. But I'm not watching the headlights. I'm watching the second-floor window of the Heritage's east wing, where light blinks in controlled sequence. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code I learned as a Boy Scout 56 years ago. SOS. Except the pattern is inverted. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long. The opposite of distress. Confirmation. Ethel's window. My neighbor of 2 years, the 68-year-old widow, who had watched this building long before I recognized the threat. The woman who'd served me coffee every morning and never once asked why Prescott had started visiting so frequently. The woman whose light is signaling tactical confirmation in bureau code. My eyes sweep the shadows beyond the parking lot. Movement catches my attention 30 yards west, near the garden wall. A figure stands in combat-ready stance, left foot forward, weight distributed on the balls of both feet hands, positioned for rapid tactical response. Curtis Griffin, not hunched in fugitive panic, not fleeing toward the tree line, standing sentry. I recognize the stance from federal courthouse security details I witnessed 1,000 times during my legal career. That's not civilian posture. That's bureau training. Curtis isn't running. He's securing a perimeter. Get in? Hugh says, pulling me toward the SUV. Engine's running. But his voice has changed. The confidence has thinned. He's calculating trajectories, now recalibrating odds. The headlights are closer 1/2 mile and closing. More lights appear behind them. Not 1 county unit. 3, maybe 4. Inside the Heritage. Prescott sheds the zip ties the moment Hugh's footsteps fade. The plastic restraints fall away effortlessly. They were never tightened, just staged for appearance. He stands, rolls his shoulders, and moves with focused precision toward the reading room's southeast corner. The safe is hidden behind a false panel in the built-in bookshelf, exactly where it's been since my father installed it in 1973. Prescott kneels, slides 3 volumes aside, and reveals the combination lock. Combination 61473, he whispers to himself. Northeast corner, exactly where he said. Except we don't have a northeast corner. The code was intentionally wrong geography, designed to test if Prescott would still follow the instruction. He memorized the combination weeks ago, watching me through the door gap, while I accessed the safe for estate documents. Waited for the moment I'd be distracted enough to miss his observation. The safe opens with a mechanical click. Inside my father's original dossier from 1976, the one documenting the federal prosecutor's investigation, into organized fugitive networks operating through residential safe houses. The network his investigation dismantled. The network that apparently regenerated 47 years later, using the same infrastructure, the same transit routes, the same blueprint my father had documented in meticulous detail. Prescott extracts the dossier, leather-bound, water-stained, filled with evidence my father had preserved, despite Justice Department orders to destroy it, his insurance policy, his proof that the network reached higher than anyone wanted to admit. My son is holding the exact evidence I baited him to steal. The fire window behind him opens without sound. Ethel Butler steps through, no longer moving with the careful slowness of a 62-year-old widow with arthritis. She's 62, yes, I'd verified her references, her background, her employment history. All of it authentic. All of it carefully constructed cover. She holds an FBI tracking terminal in her left hand, credentials in her right. Her face is cold and professional, stripped of the warm domestic kindness she'd performed for 14 months. Prescott Nathaniel Ross. She says, her voice carrying federal authority I've never heard from her before. FBI. That dossier is tagged with an RFID tracker. Has been since your father placed it in the safe 6 weeks ago. Prescott's hands freeze on the leather binding, his face the practiced calm, the strategic mask cracks for the first time tonight. Put it on the desk, Ethel continues, hands visible. Your network's been penetrated for 8 months. Hugh Bennett flipped in March. Curtis Griffin has been undercover since February. Every crossing, every payment, every fugitive you've moved, we have documentation of all of it. The dossier slips from Prescott's fingers onto the desk. His hands rise slowly, palms out. But his mind is still calculating. I can see it in his eyes. Searching for the exit, the leverage, the tactical pivot that turns exposure into escape. Brandon and Neville were arrested 17 minutes ago at the Blaine crossing, Ethel says. Gate 7 has been under surveillance since October. The $80,000 Hugh mentioned. That transaction triggered a FinCEN alert the moment it cleared. Account 4718 was a federal honeypot. In the parking lot, the first siren cuts through the freezing rain, not distant anymore. Half a mile out and closing fast. More sirens layer behind it, county units, converging from the access road. State police from the highway, federal vehicles from the regional field office. Hugh's hand drops to his waistband. I feel the shift in his body language, the decision crystallizing. He's calculating whether he can reach his device before Curtis closes the distance, whether he can use me as leverage, as hostage, as bargaining chip. The cassette recorder continues spinning against my ribs, every second preserved. Hugh's confession about Gate 7, the crossing time, the payment details, the admission that Prescott would slip his restraints and disappear. All of it on tape. All of it evidence I no longer need, because the FBI has been recording everything for 8 months. Howard, Hugh says quietly, his voice tight with controlled desperation, get in the vehicle, now. But I'm watching Curtis Griffin move through the shadows closing the perimeter, watching more headlights swing through the gate, counting the tactical positions forming around the Heritage Federal units, boxing us in from 3 directions. My son is trapped inside with an FBI agent. I'm trapped outside with a fugitive whose hand is on a device. And the evidence I've been gathering, the cassette I risked everything to record, is redundant. The Bureau has been 10 steps ahead of all of us. Hugh's arm locked around my throat before the first tactical boot hit pavement. The crackling edge of the device pressed cold against my temple, his forearm cutting off air. I felt his pulse hammering through the layers of clothing between us. Elevated, but controlled. This wasn't panic. This was calculation. Hugh Bennett, FBI. Curtis's voice cut through the rain, amplified and absolute. Release him. Device down, 3 seconds. Red laser dots converged on Hugh's torso from 3 different angles. Rooftop, garden wall, southeast corner near the delivery entrance. I walk or the old man doesn't, Hugh said, his voice steady. Hostage situations require negotiation. Get me a vehicle and clear passage. I remembered the profile from page 47 of my father's dossier. Hugh Bennett, Bosnia, 1998, close quarters extraction, right-handed dominant, maintains device in right hand left arm for restraint. Balance shifts forward before triggering. Vulnerable to lateral disruption from the hostage's left side. I stepped hard left, dropped my weight, and twisted against the weakest point of his grip. maybe 8 inches of movement. His arm loosened for half a second. Curtis covered the distance in 3 strides. The tackle drove Hugh backward into wet asphalt. With the full force of federal training, the device skittered across the pavement. 2 agents materialized from the shadows, cuffing Hugh's wrists before he could recover. I stumbled forward, gasping, throat burning. Curtis steadied me with one hand. "You mapped it perfectly," he said quietly. "Lateral left, exactly like you said. Exactly as I'd described it 3 days ago, calling from a gas station 20 miles away, using a burner phone bought for that single conversation. When I'd said I needed help, but couldn't explain everything yet. When I'd asked him to trust me without giving him a reason to." Through the reading room window, I watched federal agents surround Prescott. Ethel held his arms while another agent produced handcuffs. My son stood motionless beside the stolen dossier, his face illuminated by tactical flashlights. Our eyes met through the rain-streaked glass. I waited for anger, betrayal, pleading. His expression gave me nothing. The same hollow calm he'd worn at 19 when the ethics board delivered its verdict. At 23 when his mentor found the forged letter. He didn't look away. Neither did I. Then the agents turned him toward the door and he was gone. By 12:30 a.m., the building stood empty except for one perimeter unit. Curtis found me on the concrete back steps, the same steps where Prescott and I used to sit on summer evenings before law school, before everything became calculation. He settled beside me without asking, poured coffee from a thermos into the lid cup and handed it over. "Black, no sugar," he said, same as always. The first sip tasted like 45 years of friendship, like law school, like 2 young men who believed justice was something you could hold in your hands. I reached into my coat and placed the cassette recorder in Curtis's palm. "Everything," I said. "Gate 7, the crossing time, account numbers, Brandon's payment, all of it." He slipped it into an evidence bag. "We have 8 months of wire recordings. But this is your son's voice. Your evidence. That means something to a jury." "He's my son," I said, "and I put him in federal custody." "You did," Curtis agreed, "because he would have kept lying until someone got hurt." We sat in silence as steam rose from our cups and dissolved into November cold. When Curtis asked if I would attend the trial, I couldn't answer. He didn't push. He simply poured the last of the coffee into my cup and waited the way he had for 45 years, trusting me to write my own ending. My son's voice fills the federal courtroom from a recorder he called obsolete. The audio quality is tinny, filtered through speakers designed for digital formats, but every word lands with perfect clarity. I sit in the gallery 3 rows behind the prosecution table and listen to Prescott dismantle his own future. Brandon handles the logistics, the transportation, the documentation, the crossing schedules. Neville manages the financial side, the payments, the transfers, keeping everything clean. The federal prosecutor, a woman in her mid-40s, named Diana Holt, stands beside the evidence table where my father's cassette recorder sits in a clear plastic bag marked Exhibit 14A. She lets the tape play for 43 seconds before stopping it. Analog cassette recording, November 16th, 2023. She announces to the preliminary hearing, subject Prescott Ross, detailing $800,000 payment structure across 13 months of operation. The tape continues for an additional 6 minutes, providing complete architectural documentation of a $3.2 million money laundering network. The defense attorney court-appointed since Prescott's own firm is under federal seizure, objects on technical grounds, chain of custody, authentication. The objections are procedural theater. Everyone in the courtroom knows the tape is authentic. This single recording, Margaret continues, provides sufficient evidentiary foundation for RICO conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction charges against 5 defendants: Prescott Ross, Hugh Bennett, Brandon Merrick, Neville Strauss, and network facilitator David Cormack. Combined with 8 months of wire surveillance and financial documentation, we have grounds for maximum sentencing recommendations. Maximum sentencing, 18 to 24 years. The numbers sit in my chest like lead weights. Obsolete. That's what he called it. Obsolete 1. I remember the exact moment. 3 years ago, clearing out my father's study, I'd found the recorder in a desk drawer. Prescott had picked it up, turned it over in his hands, smiled that particular smile that meant he was about to deliver a cutting observation. "Dad, you know they make digital versions now, right? This thing belongs in a museum. I'd kept it anyway. used it for novel dictation when I wanted the tactile satisfaction of physical media. And on November 16th, when I needed to record evidence, my son would never think to search for that obsolete machine, became the most important piece of technology in my life. The hearing continues for another 90 minutes. Financial exhibits, wire transcripts, testimony from Curtis about the 8-month investigation. I sit through all of it with the same detached focus I used to bring to trial proceedings when I was practicing law. Observe, process, don't feel. Feeling comes later. I drive home through early December, rain the kind of persistent northwest drizzle that turns the world gray and flat. The heritage looks different now, not like home, but like a crime scene that's been released back to its owner. The federal evidence teams left everything technically in place, but the house feels violated, searched, known. I make coffee I don't drink and sit in the living room as evening darkens into night. The television provides background noise news, anchors cycling through national stories I can't focus on. Then the local segment cuts to breaking news. Defense attorneys Brandon Merrick and Neville Strauss were arrested this morning in a coordinated federal operation targeting what prosecutors call a sophisticated fugitive transit network. The screen shows footage of tactical agents outside a luxury condominium in Portland's Pearl District. Brandon Merrick, 47 years old, silver-haired and expensively dressed, being led out in handcuffs. Neville Strauss, 52, follows minutes later from a different building, his face carefully blank. I'd never met either of them. They existed in my understanding only as names Prescott mentioned on that cassette rolls, in a conspiracy I'd helped expose. Now they're real people being destroyed by evidence I provided. Federal agents seized computers, financial records, and over $2.8 million from corrupted trust accounts. The anchor continues. The law firm of Merrick Strauss and Associates is under federal receivership, with 43 active client cases now under review for potential malpractice and fraud. 43 clients. 43 people whose legal representation just evaporated because their attorneys were running a criminal network alongside their legitimate practice. How many of those cases were actually legitimate? How many clients were complicit? How many were innocent people whose lives are now complicated by association? When did justice start feeling like punishment for the witness? I won. The network is collapsed. Prescott, Hugh Brandon Neville, and this David Cormack person I've never heard of, all facing maximum federal sentences. The evidence I gathered, the cassette, I recorded the alarm, I triggered it, all worked exactly as intended. So why does victory feel like I'm the one in prison? The news cycles to weather. I should turn it off, go to bed, try to sleep. But I sit in darkness, watching rain streak the windows, feeling the emptiness that's replaced every other emotion. My phone vibrates on the coffee table. Restricted number, federal area code. Howard? Curtis's voice tired but professional. You got a minute? Yeah. Prescott wants to see you. Pre-sentencing. He specifically requested you through his attorney this afternoon. I watch rain blur the streetlight outside into an indistinct glow. Did he say why? Silence on the line. Then he said he needs to tell you something before the judge makes it permanent. His exact words, before my father has to live with what comes next. Before I have to live with what comes next. As if I'm not already living with it. As if the weight of having destroyed my son's life isn't something I carry every waking moment. When I ask, tomorrow, 2 p.m. federal detention facility downtown. I can arrange clearance, but you don't have to go. You've given enough, Howard. You don't owe him closure. I don't owe him closure. Legally, morally, practically, Curtis is right. I've done my duty. I've provided evidence. I've cooperated with federal investigators. I've attended the preliminary hearing and watched my testimony begin the process of putting my son in prison for 2 decades. I don't owe Prescott anything, but he's still my son. Arrange it, I say, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Curtis exhales slowly. I'll text you the details. Howard, be ready for whatever he's going to say. He's got nothing left to lose now. The call ends. I sit in darkness holding a phone that feels too heavy and wonder what truth could possibly be worse than what I already know. The woman my son extorted is crying in a federal hallway, and she's apologizing to me. Imogene Burns stands outside deposition room, 4C testimony finished. She's 47, small-framed, carrying the kind of quiet dignity that survives being weaponized in someone else's conspiracy. I recognize her from Curtis's witness list, the woman who saw Prescott on November 3rd, the one he threatened into silence. She sees me before I can retreat. Her face crumples. Mr. Ross? Her voice breaks on my name. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should keep walking. I'm here to review exhibits for tomorrow's pre-sentencing meeting, not to absolve the people my son terrorized. But she's crying, and I'm the father of the man who taught her to be afraid. Mrs. Burns, I say quietly, you have nothing to apologize for. I do. She wipes her eyes with a shredded tissue. He told me if I said anything, immigration would investigate my family. My daughter's husband, his visa renewal was pending. Prescott said one call and Marco would be deported before Christmas. Of course she believed him. Prescott was a defense attorney, authority, connections, the professional veneer that makes threats sound like inevitabilities. You protected your daughter, I say. That's what parents do. She looks at me with red-rimmed eyes. But you're his father. You turned him in. You chose differently. Two parents, two impossible choices. Only one of us got it right. I chose too late, I say. You chose in time to protect someone. That's the difference. She nods, still crying, and walks away down the marble corridor. I watch her go and wonder how many others exist. People Prescott leveraged, intimidated, used. People whose testimonies are now building the case that will take 2 decades of his life. 3 weeks later, I meet Ethel at a small cafe in Beaverton, 15 miles from the Heritage, far enough from federal buildings. She arrives exactly on time. Jeans, wool sweater, reading glasses on a chain. She looks exactly like the neighbor I thought she was for 2 years, except her eyes are different, sharper, assessing. Ethel Butler isn't your real name, I say when she sits. It is now. She orders black coffee, then turns back to me. 32 years Directorate of Operations. Retired 2017. When Hugh Bennett's name crossed federal watch lists, I volunteered as counterintelligence observer. The paper you dropped in October. I say, the strange phone number. Secure FBI field line. I left it where you'd find it, waited to see if you'd call. When you didn't, I assumed you were either oblivious or running your own operation. Then I saw you checking sight lines from the reading room window. She used my fiction as fieldcraft. My imagination became her tradecraft. The Morse signal from the mezzanine window, I say. That came from my 4th novel, Chapter 18. Ethel confirms. Inverted SOS for tactical confirmation. I figured if you wrote it, you'd recognize it. You read my books to run an operation. I read them because they're good, she says. Your tradecraft is better than half the field manuals at Langley. The compliment sits uncomfortably. My fictional methods help to bring down my own son. Then Ethel sets her cup down deliberately. Prescott requested a pre-sentencing meeting. Did Curtis tell you what he said to the magistrate? I shake my head. He wants to confess something that wasn't on the tape. Something only you would understand. Her voice loses its warmth. Be ready, Howard. People with nothing left to lose don't ask for meetings to apologize. I stare out the window at December rain, turning the parking lot gray. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll sit across from my son and hear whatever truth he's been saving for last. Ethel's right. It's going to hurt. The phone receiver weighs more than any manuscript I've ever held. Through reinforced glass at the Federal Detention Center in Sheridan, my son sits in orange jumpsuit and handcuffs his face thinner than it was 5 weeks ago. He picks up his receiver. Our eyes meet. Dad. His voice comes through tinny and distant, filtered through institutional phone systems designed to remind everyone that intimacy is a privilege the incarcerated have forfeited. Thanks for coming. I nod. Words feel inadequate. What do you say to the son you helped imprison? Prescott's hands are steady on the phone. No trembling now, no performance. Just exhaustion and something that might be honesty. Ethel said you wanted to tell me something, I say. Something not on the tape. He looks down at the metal counter separating us. An apology and an explanation. You deserve both. I deserve nothing, I say. You're the one serving federal time. Because I was an idiot. His voice cracks, and this time it's real. Dad, I thought you built everything on dirt. Grandfather's connections to organized crime, the early book deals that came too easily, the way you never talked about how you really started. I thought, he stopped swallows. I thought our whole family legacy was corrupt, that everything I inherited was tainted. The words hit like physical blows. What I wanted success I earned. Prescott continues, his voice gaining momentum now, like confession that's been damned too long. Not success built on money laundering or mob favors or whatever deals you'd made to get the heritage off the ground. I started the network because I wanted to prove I could build something real, something that mattered on my own terms, outside your shadow, outside grandfather's shadow. He thought I was dirty. All these years he thought I was dirty? Your grandfather, I say slowly, carefully, testified against the mob. He testified before a federal grand jury in the 1970s. He was the federal prosecutor who built the case that sent 17 organized crime figures to prison. It destroyed his health. The stress, the threats, the protective custody. He died of a heart attack in 19. I catch myself before specifying the year. He died because testifying took everything from him. Prescott's face goes slack. But the connections, the files in the safe, the sealed records, were evidence he preserved? I interrupt. Insurance in case the mob ever came after us. Documentation that if anything happened to our family, federal prosecutors would know exactly who ordered it. And my early book deals, I laugh, but it's bitter. I wrote 17 novels in 12 years to keep us alive after your mother left. 17 books while working as a public defender, because your grandfather's pension barely covered the mortgage. There was no dirt, Prescott. There was just survival. He stares at me through the glass. His hands finally start to shake. Then I destroyed my life over a lie, he whispers. You destroyed it over pride, I correct. The lie just gave you permission. You wanted to believe I was corrupt because it justified your own corruption. You wanted to believe you were better than me, so you built a criminal network to prove it. That's not misunderstanding. That's choice. The silence between us stretches for 30 seconds. A minute. Prescott's eyes fill, but he doesn't wipe them, just lets the tears fall. I'm sorry, he finally says. For everything. For using the heritage. For lying. For... His voice breaks completely. For making you choose between your son and your integrity. I'm sorry you thought you had to earn your way out of corruption that never existed. I say, but I'm not sorry for the choice I made. You committed federal crimes. You terrorized witnesses. You built an assembly line for fugitives. Whatever you believed about our family, those actions were yours. The guard signals 5 minutes remaining. Prescott nods, understanding. Will you come again? He asks. Before sentencing, I consider the question. Consider what I owe him, what I owe myself. What forgiveness looks like when the person asking for it is still guilty, despite his misunderstanding. I don't know, I say honestly. I'll think about it. He nods, accepts it. The call ends. I drive back to the heritage through late December. Rain the sky, the color of old concrete. The bookstore has been closed since the arrest's yellow crime scene tape long since removed, but the building's still carrying the weight of what happened here. I unlock the front door for the first time in 5 weeks. The smell hits me first, old paperwood polish, the particular mustiness that accumulates when a building isn't breathing. Dust motes drift through afternoon light, filtering through the front windows. Everything looks exactly as I left it, but fundamentally different. This isn't the sanctuary it was. It's a crime scene I'm inheriting back. I walk past shelves of legal thrillers and mysteries past the biography section where my father's favorite books still sit spine out. One volume is misplaced, The Ghost Protocol, my 8th novel, sitting in the wrong section. I pull it, return it to proper display. How do you reopen a bookstore that witnessed your son's arrest? The answer comes quietly. You reopen it, because it's not about what happened. It's about what still needs answering. I climb the stairs to the reading room. The safe sits behind the false panel exactly where Prescott found it. I input the combination, feel the lock release. Inside my father's envelope, yellowed paper. Seal unbroken since he placed it here 43 years ago. On the front, his handwriting, for Howard, to be opened after I'm gone, when you're ready to understand. I kept this place closed to preserve a ghost. Time to open it to find the living truth. I carry the envelope downstairs past empty shelves and silent corners, to the front window, where December sunlight streams through rain-streaked glass. The heritage isn't about what was. It's about what still needs answering. 43 years. Dad's letter has waited 43 years. No more waiting. I hold the envelope against the light. The paper is thin, fragile. Inside, answers about why my father stayed, why he testified against the mob, knowing it would kill him what he wanted me to know after death. I slide my thumb under the flap. The seal breaks with a whisper of old glue releasing. Inside 3 handwritten pages on legal pad paper, my father's precise script covering both sides. 43 years of silence about to end. I unfold the first page and begin to read. My father's handwriting hasn't aged a day. I've aged 43 years without it. The letter unfolds in my hands on New Year's Eve candlelight, casting shadows across 3 pages of precise script. Outside the Heritage's reading room windows, the city prepares for midnight. Inside, I'm alone with words written before my son was born. Howard, the letter begins. Just my name in his hand. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally opened the safe I built into this building. The combination is your birth year, not because I'm sentimental, but because you are my true heritage, not this building, not the books, not the reputation I've spent decades constructing. The bookstore was my escape from what I did, the testimony, the lives I destroyed to protect others, the organized crime figures I sent to prison knowing their families would come for mine. I built the heritage as sanctuary. But the safe, Howard the safe and the silent alarm I had installed in '76, those were never about protecting money or preserving evidence. They were your escape hatch. If history repeated, if the sins I committed ever came back, if you ever needed a way out I couldn't provide. I set the combination to your birth year. I installed the alarm with county dispatch codes routing to federal response. I documented everything in files I sealed here. Not for me, for you. You are my escape son, my way out of the darkness I walked through. Every novel you write, every honest thing you create, that's the legacy I wanted. Not the prosecutions, not the testimony. You. Use what's in the safe if you need it, or don't. But know it was built with love I couldn't say out loud, and protection I could never guarantee. You are my true heritage. Dad. I fold the letter with hands that shake for the first time in weeks. He knew. Decades before I needed it, he knew. The candle burns low. Midnight approaches. I sit in darkness and understand my father built me an exit from danger I hadn't yet faced, and I used it exactly as he'd planned 43 years later, to escape a son who'd turned our heritage into a crime scene. Fathers and sons, escape and return, legacy and betrayal. But the letter changes something. My father didn't leave me a building. He left me a way out. New Year's morning arrives with winter sunlight and coffee. I unlock the Heritage's main doors at 9 a.m. to find Curtis on the front step, 2 cups in hand, and Ethel behind him carrying something wrapped in checkered cloth. Couldn't let you spend the first day of the year alone, Curtis says. Ethel unwraps homemade apple pie, steam rising from the lattice crust. Real apples this time, she says with a small smile. No can opener required. We sit in the main aisle on wooden chairs, morning light streaming through windows. The pie is perfect, tart and sweet. The coffee is strong. The company is quiet. Prescott's sentencing is February 9th, Curtis says after his second slice. Federal Judge Marianne Castellano. Fair but firm. She'll honor whatever plea agreement his attorney negotiates. I nod. The information doesn't hurt the way it did a month ago. It's just fact now. My son will be sentenced. I'll attend or I won't. The machinery of justice moves regardless. To heritage, Curtis says, raising his coffee cup. Not the building, the man. Ethel raises hers. To survival. I lift my cup, feeling warmth seep through ceramic. To escapes. The ones we build and the ones we earn. We drink. The coffee tastes like normalcy. After they leave, I climb back to the reading room. The vintage manual typewriter sits on the desk, a 1963 Royal Safari I'd bought at an estate sale 30 years ago and never used. Fresh white paper loaded, keys waiting. I spent 20 years writing this story. Now I have to live it. I sit. Position my fingers on the home keys. The metal is cool familiar. No delete key. No backspace. Just forward momentum and permanence. I type. My name is Howard, and I am 64 years old. For 20 years I wrote novels about fathers and sons who failed each other. Legal thrillers where the protagonist discovered his child had committed crimes. Mysteries where family loyalty battled legal duty. Stories where impossible choices destroyed everyone involved. I never thought I'd become one of my own characters. But here I am, typewriter humming, ready to write the hardest truth I've ever faced. I turned in my son to federal authorities. He built a criminal network using my home as cover. And when I discovered it, I recorded his confession on a cassette recorder and activated a silent alarm my father installed 43 years ago. This is not a thriller. This is not a mystery. This is what happened when fiction became life. The keys click forward. Each strike leaves a permanent mark. Through the reading room window, I can see the Heritage's reopened sign catching morning light. The safe in the corner stands open empty now except for my father's letter and the cassette that captured everything. Every family has a locked safe. Some hold money. Some hold sins. Ours held the truth about escape. I continue typing. My father taught me that heritage isn't about buildings or reputations. It's about the exits we build for the people we love, the escape hatches we install decades before they're needed, the silent alarms that route to help when darkness comes. I used my father's escape to stop my son's crimes, and now I'm writing it down because that's what novelists do. We take the hardest truths and make them permanent. Every family has a locked safe. The question isn't what's inside, it's whether you're ready to look. I looked, and here's what I found. The typewriter keys click steadily forward. Outside January first unfolds in cold winter sunlight. Inside the Heritage, a father writes about the son he lost, and the father he finally understood. The story continues, it always does. But now I'm writing the ending I can live with. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent years believing I knew my son. I was wrong. When you discover someone you love has built their life on deception, you face an impossible choice. Protect them, or protect the truth. I chose truth. Living with a lie would have destroyed me as surely as my evidence destroyed him. Don't make my mistake of waiting too long to see what's really there. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound. When someone you raised, someone you trusted completely, uses that trust as a weapon, it's a kind of revenge you never saw coming. But here's what I learned sometimes. Stopping family betrayal isn't about revenge at all. It's about refusing to become complicit in their destruction. I believe God gave me the tools I needed exactly when I needed them. My father's letter, that cassette recorder, the courage to choose justice over comfort. The betrayal was theirs. The choice was mine. What would I have done in my place? Leave a comment and tell me honestly, would you have turned in your own child or found another way? If this story made you think, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about impossible choices and family truth, subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge. I read every comment you leave. Thank you for staying until the very end. Remember, while this story contains fictionalized elements for reflection and storytelling, the lessons about truth, family, and difficult choices are real. May you never have to make the choice I made, but if you do, may you find the courage to choose what's right.